Hello! Let's talk about conspiracy theories. So, it's current year. We've lived through a lot together now, haven't we? The cracks are really starting to show and the contradictions are sharpening. I think everyone's finally on the same page. Capitalism's got to go. And it's time to build big, sexy communism. And it's all going just swimmingly. Us commies have firmly cemented our ideas as the hot new thing, the punk rock ideology. Everybody wants a piece. And the good news is, under communism, everybody can have a piece. But being so popular isn't all just a walk in the park. It does come with its own problems. This essay is going to be about growth and division. What happens when social groups get bigger? First, though, let's get some context. In the 60s and 70s in the US, intelligence agencies worked hard to undermine, disband, and destroy leftist organizations. Even mutual aid networks that were just working to give food to the hungry and shelter to the homeless. Groups like the Black Panthers were labeled the biggest domestic threat to national security, and then all their leaders started winding up dead. With leftist revolutionary groups on the retreat, the FBI weren't idle. They weren't happy to just push leftists off the table. They wanted to own the whole restaurant. Is that a good metaphor? So they started writing their own leftist theory to spread in radical circles, encouraging reformist ideas and driving focus away from government surveillance and intelligence and onto the mainstream media. They even made up a guy. The FBI fabricated an entire academic publication history dating back through the 50s, and then had their fictitious academic start publishing these subversive books teaching leftists how the mainstream media manipulates the population. This was a huge boon for the intelligence community for a few reasons. Firstly, as previously mentioned, it drew attention away from government agencies as the enemies of the left. It taught people what the media was doing in terms of market forces, rather than actively malicious campaign of misinformation. But, and this is crucial, it fit in really neatly with existing conspiracy theories. They control the media. They were banking on there being enough anti-Semites in radical circles that this would cause a huge schism while driving all energy and attention away from organizing and direct action. However, they knew their academics' credibility would quickly wane without public appearances. So they took all their publications and attributed them to one of their undercover agents who'd already been infiltrating leftist circles for over a decade. An agent by the name of Noam Chomsky. Okay, no, obviously that was all nonsense. Noam Chomsky is categorically not an undercover FBI agent. I was telling you a little story that I made up to illustrate some points about how conspiracy theories work. During that story, at some point, most of you realized what was happening, but at what point? How much did you believe up until that point? Some of what I said was actually true. Some of it was based on real things that have happened. Do you know which parts? I'm speaking to tens of thousands of people right now, not to brag, and if I hadn't said this was all made up, some of you would have believed me. Some of you even are smaller content creators who would have cited this video and repeated what I said uncritically. Some people, even now that I've told you it's made up, are at home going, I bet it's real though. She says it's fake, but I wouldn't put it past them. I also worked in criticisms of Chomsky that people do have, so that people predisposed to dislike him would be more likely to buy in, and here's a nice, big, juicy, important point. What does buy in mean? I didn't say believe, I said buy in. Because a lot of the traction and momentum that conspiracy theories need to spread comes from people who don't think they actually believe in the conspiracy, just because they don't believe in 100% of what they're told. It works a lot like paranormal investigation shows. Most of the audience sit there going, I can't believe other people are buying this crap. Real ghosts don't even look like that. And only a relatively small amount of the audience are at home going, oh, I fucking knew Abraham Lincoln's ghost killed JFK. This show fucking rules. Hey, welcome back to Fire Safety Lessons. As many of you know, the anti-fire department has been busier than ever lately. Yes, there have been more fires to fight, but also there's been a huge uptick in new volunteers. Not all the new volunteers are quite as anti-fire as I'd personally prefer, though. Some people say they're anti-fire and turn around and try and recruit arsonists into the department. Some people don't even claim to be anti-fire at all. But most worryingly, some people have been saying that the fire isn't even real. And that is really scary. Because as much as I love the department, I have to admit, we like to think of ourselves as fireproof. And the truth is, we're not.
Out of the sewer, literal vampire potbelly goblins are hobbling around coming after us. Literal vampire
Conspiracy theories have been fascinating to me for as long as I can remember. They have this bizarre relationship to reality which makes them just tantalizing. First learning what wacky bullshit some people believe, and then figuring out which parts are gibberish and which parts are true, or at least based in the truth, is like an enticing puzzle. It's like a cryptic crossword where every answer turns out to be, sooner or later, the Jews. Imagine my delight at finding myself being a transgender leftist YouTuber, simultaneously a member of several groups about which people believe all sorts of nonsense. What a treat! I know lots of you are here to hear about wacky cranks and the funny things they believe in, and I'm looking forward to it as much as you are. But we really ought to learn a thing or two about how conspiracy belief works before we can talk about any of that. So, Richard Hofstadter is a name that comes up a lot in the academic writing about conspiracy theories, and I would know because I've read it all. I wouldn't normally do this much reading for a project, but conspiracy belief is a relatively new and small emerging field, and I read it for fun. I really like conspiracy theories. Hofstadter wrote the OG essay in the field of conspiracy research, The Paranoid Style in American Politics, and at the time, nobody gave a fuck. Because unlike me and my cool friends, no one really cared about conspiracy theories until American conservatives started living in a noticeably different reality to American liberals. America is going to be absolutely inescapable in this discussion, not just because the biggest conspiracy movements are there, and therefore most thought about modern conspiracism is also centered there, but as Hofstadter pointed out, the style of politics that they practice over there across the pond is very nurturing to conspiracy theories. More on that shortly. Hofstadter's original essay is very good, but I won't be quoting from it extensively here because, as the author notes, when he says paranoid style, he means that the political style of conspiracism resembles the behavior of someone clinically diagnosed as paranoid. And while I think the metaphor is apt, I think the way that he writes, the paranoid thinks this, the paranoid does that, is kind of tasteless. Nonetheless, as Hofstadter writes, style has more to do with the way in which ideas are believed than the truth or falsity of their content. So, let's learn about the ways in which conspiracy theories are believed. In a literature review titled Belief in Conspiracy Theories, Basic Principles of an Emerging Research Domain, Jan-Willem Bren-Pruyen and Karen M. Douglas set out 4 things to understand about conspiracism. Take note, intrepid investigator. These are your 4 rules to help you find up from down when you're all the way down the rabbit hole. 1. Conspiracy belief is universal. In other words, there is no demographic that is immune to conspiracy belief. There is no divide in race, gender, or politics that would tell us more reliably who is likely to believe in conspiracy theories implicitly. This one is interesting already, because although you've clicked on this video and you've already watched this far, a lot of you are probably thinking, hang on, Sophie, conspiracy theories are for right-wingers. Not so. Conspiracy theories are for everyone. Yay! For instance, about 60% of Americans today believe that JFK was killed by a conspiracy, rather than Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, and that percentage doesn't dramatically change much for any group, including Hillary Clinton voters in 2016 and Donald Trump voters in 2016. There's only a 2% difference between those. And believe me, 2% does not explain QAnon, because when surveyed today, 17% of Americans agreed with the statement, a group of Satan-worshipping elites who run a child sex ring are trying to control our politics and media. 37% were unsure. I'm going to stick with JFK because it's a useful example for a bunch of reasons. As I just said, most people statistically agree that it's true. And they're probably right? But unlike me and my cool friends who go outdoors a healthy amount, most people didn't come to that conclusion by reading declassified CIA documents or looking at bullet trajectories. Most people believe that JFK was killed by a conspiracy because... 2. Conspiracy belief is emotional. It can be easy to assume that because conspiracy theorists love to pull out facts and minute details to prop up their theories, conspiracy belief must be rooted in analytical thinking, but actually it's rooted in intuitive thinking, that is to say, emotional thinking. We tend to believe things happened not based on the facts we're told, but based on normative similarity, other people around us think it's true, and historical similarity. It fits in with the things we already know about history. On that basis, leftists should actually be a lot more susceptible to conspiracy theories, because if you know the CIA is responsible for something called the Silent Holocaust, it's not hard to believe they're up to all sorts of horrifying crap. And because of that, we need to be really careful in these discussions to distinguish between things that we agree with politically and verifiable facts. There's been a whole bunch of interesting writing, which we will barely touch on today, about how anxiety feeds into conspiracy belief, but it's more of a psychological approach, and today we need to be more sociological. That said, another reason that JFK is such an interesting case is that you can see it change over time, because when the Warren Commission first released their report, 87% of Americans did think Oswald acted alone. If you imagine someone who was a teenager when JFK was killed, who then lived through the next 60 years of American history, the assassination of MLK, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, the Vietnam War, the whole of the 80s, the rise of the internet, 9/11, some pretty damn turbulent stuff has happened since JFK was killed, and the idea of an alternate reality where JFK got to live out his term and created a safe, happy, harmonious society does appeal to both progressive liberals and modern reactionaries. Now we should think about a mechanism by which the problem gets worse. If you believe things because people around you believe them, and because they fit in with the story of the world that you've been told, what happens when you already believe in conspiracy theories, and a new conspiracy theory comes along, which is similar in shape if not content, and contains many of the same bad guys? And what happens if everyone else around you is in the same media environment and believes all the things you do? This is how someone ends up believing in nothing but conspiracy theories, and it's an important feature of conspiracy belief. Conspiracy theories exist in what is called the cultic milieu. I don't know how to say this. Anyway, the cultic milieu is a cultural and imaginative space where various conspiracy theories propagate, kind of wiggling around, vibing in the milieu, just feeding off the same audience of people who are really into conspiracy theories. And it's why someone who can be described as a conspiracy theorist is unlikely to only believe in one completely isolated conspiracy theory. As Michael Barkun says in Culture of Conspiracy, and two men called Joseph say in American Conspiracy Theories, America has a particularly strong and vibrant cultic milieu. But that idea of someone whose entire reality is shaped by conspiracy theories is what leads us to the third principle, that 3. Conspiracy belief is consequential. This is how we can start to distinguish between the entire 60% of Americans who believe Oswald wasn't acting alone and the proportion of people we would call conspiracy theorists. 60% of Americans buy in to a JFK conspiracy theory, but for some smaller number of people, they live in a reality where JFK was definitely killed by the deep state, who also faked the moon landing and also started the Vietnam War because they are reptilians from the Hollow Earth. And if you live in that reality, it is your moral obligation to do everything you can to fight the reptilian overlords and defend humanity. For a counterexample, if you believe that anthropogenic climate change is real, then it is your moral obligation to do everything you can to change the shape of global power to stop it, which is why many people who don't want to change the shape of global power choose to live in a reality where anthropogenic climate change is not real or not significant or not stoppable. The point is, conspiracy belief has consequences. Whether those consequences are refusing to recycle, publishing a book calling YouTubers CIA-funded shills, or your wife leaving you because you ask every transgender person you meet whether they're an adrenochrome-huffing demon. But the way we've been talking about conspiracy theories so far may not line up with people's observable reality. That it is the modern right wing, at least in the Anglosphere, who buy into, believe, and spread the majority of conspiracy theories. And that's why we need the fourth and final principle. That 4. Conspiracy belief is social. I am about to say one of the, if not the, most important phrase in all of the conspiracy theory research I have read. So put your little listening ears on, you cutie patooties. Conspiracy theories reflect intergroup social conflicts. In other words, the exact reason that conspiracy theories arise is because two groups are conflicting, and people on both sides don't have a complete picture of how or why. For instance, there is an intergroup social conflict between American conservatives and American liberals, and QAnon is a narrative that explains that conflict in terms that put American conservatives in the right. This is why it features so much projection. Claims that the social justice left are banning and burning books while censoring and banning the exact information literally burned by the actual Nazis. Hyper-focus on the liberal, pedophilic cabal while supporting Donald Trump, a notorious sexual abuser and alleged pedophile who supports other alleged pedophiles. The emotional truth being defended here is, well, even if we're bad, they're worse. When George Bush was in government, the conspiracy theory that 9/11 was an inside job was far more popular on the left than on the right, and far more popular outside of America than inside it. Like QAnon, this conspiracy theory provided a comforting narrative to leftists who saw the terror attacks as a consequence of American foreign policy. 9/11 was an inside job reflects the perspective that America spent decades bombing the Middle East, and the American government is not entirely without blame for 9/11. That's the thing about emotional truth. It doesn't always line up cleanly or comfortably with the reality with which you're being presented. And when that cognitive dissonance hits, a lot of people choose to lie to themselves. And those are the tenets of conspiratorial belief.
About the last men standing.
Elliott took conspiracy theory.
Two half-dead men. I don't know. Like
Mass hypnosis.
you and I would not be more
Says that you're a viable human. And under the bioethics in Europe and under the UN now, which is all Nazi. By the way, the EU was set up by the Nazis. Volkswagen, I'm not against Volkswagen itself, but that was literally drawn, the first Volkswagen by Hitler. Audi, the Olympic symbol. I mean, Hitler was a really bad dude, but he literally, so much of our world's governed by him. NASA, everything. So they've got to start getting it going now with governor, physicians, and people to go, because the nurses are freaking out. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, we're keeping babies alive and they get put in a van and drive away. What's going on? They're like, well, we didn't keep them comfortable. It's passed into a special ward with doctors that make a few million a year. And the little flesh ball is kept alive and comfortable until all the orders come in, the planes land, and they take the organs, then they take the blood, and they take the skin, Joe. You see how it works? Now
Dude,
you know
you're freaking
why.
me out with this voice.
No, but see, it's a Southern loving voice.
Oh.
You see, my dad knew organ harvesters in Dallas.
The cultic milieu is called a milieu because a milieu necessarily implies structurelessness and chaos. And that's one of the first things that researchers into the conspiracy space realized. It's incredibly chaotic. Conspiracy theories don't typically have one standardized narrative and may not even contain the same characters. And as I said before, way more people typically buy in to some element of a conspiracy theory than actually wholeheartedly believe them. And besides people who believe and people who buy in, there are also people who see conspiracy theories as a means to an end. Not to say that people who have something to materially gain from spinning conspiracy theories believe nothing. After all, it's a lot easier to convince others of something you yourself believe, but there are people who cynically exploit conspiracy theory audiences for their own ends. Enter George Galloway.
Why don't you have anything to say to us?
I don't speak to fake news.
All right, okay.
It's all fake news.
George Galloway, talk show host, former British politician and proud fedora owner, was a member of British Parliament, so there's a fucking red flag, for Labour from 1987 until 2003. From very early in his career, he declared himself a socialist, a revolutionary, and an anti-imperialist. And here's where we're going to start running into something that's going to stay with us throughout this journey. There is a certain type of electoral politics Marxist within the imperial core who describes themselves as an anti-imperialist. And, in 1994, on a trip to the Middle East where George Galloway met with Saddam Hussein, Galloway told the Iraqi president,
"Sir, I salute your courage, your strength, your indefatigability. I can honestly tell you that there was not a single person to whom I told I was coming to Iraq and hoping to meet with yourself who did not wish me to convey their heartfelt, fraternal greetings and support. Meow.
So quick thing here, what the fuck? Look, George, just because a group call themselves socialists doesn't mean you have to make friends with a genocidal maniac. Saddam Hussein killed over 200,000 people. I mean, that's still fewer Iraqis than Tony Blair killed, but who's counting? Not The Hague, apparently. Not yet, anyway. Sadly, most people seem to remember George for being kind of cringe on Celebrity Big Brother one time and pretending to be a cat.
Now, would you like me to be the cat?
Pussycat. It was just disgusting. It just gave me the creeps. It was just like a shiver all down me. It was gross.
Pussycat, yes.
But Galloway has a long history of walking this weird line between being kinda rad, like calling George Bush the world's biggest terrorist, and being extremely cringe, like trying to justify a gay man being executed by the Iranian government. Two things can be true at once. A regime can be committing horrifying and indefensible abuses, and Western politicians and journalists can be using those abuses as a pretext for invasion and more imperialist wars. That doesn't make everything you hear about the regime false, and it doesn't make the regime good. This is a kind of binaristic logic which, when combined with a kind of person who is desperate for attention, is very dangerous. I heard it's popular to do foreshadowing in your videos now. That was foreshadowing. While we might be tempted to think of George Galloway in more forgiving terms than Joe Rogan or David Icke, he has been a guest on Alex Jones's show several times, including once in 2005 when Galloway had recently been expelled from the Labour Party.
Out of the White House. Okay, enough of Mr. Galloway's earlier statements and my comments. Mr. Galloway, it's a great honor to have you joining us.
It's a great pleasure, anytime at all.
Galloway keeps insisting that the attention on him when he's opposing an illegal war is the mother of all smokescreens.
And with a charge sheet like that, it's no wonder that those responsible are throwing up what I call the mother of all smokescreens.
Yeah, it's a bit clunky, but I guess I get what he's going for. He does say it like 6 times, though. Galloway does try to keep his hands clean and just court conspiracy theorist audiences, but now and then he slips up and really shows his cards, usually manifesting as anti-Semitism, which has led George to losing multiple jobs. Galloway, like lots of modern anti-Semites, works hard to give himself plausible deniability by always couching his attacks in criticisms of Israel, Zionists, international finance, etc., but he'll still say things like a criminal cabal runs the country, or that there are no Israel flags on the cup because Liverpool beat Tottenham at the football. Tottenham is a neighbourhood in London where historically a lot of Jewish people have lived, and anti-Semitism around the Tottenham Football Club goes back decades, even though Tottenham Hotspurs don't actually have statistically more Jewish supporters than any other club. Nonetheless, here's George showing his whole ass. Then he and his defenders can smugly pretend they're just complaining about big finance in politics or sport, and no, George. Leftists hate global capitalism. Leftists hate the Israeli genocide of Palestinians. Leftists hate neocolonialism and the occupation in Palestine. You hate Jews. Also, a family member of mine died at Hillsborough, so on behalf of the fallen 96, go fuck yourself, George. Nowadays, Galloway has a talk show produced by Russia Today called Moats, or Mother of All Talk Show. Christ on a cracker, George. He's also the leader of the Workers' Party of Great Britain, a reactionary pseudo-communist party that, much like Galloway, spends most of its time getting more irrelevant and more bigoted. The deputy leader of WPB is Jyoti Bra, who Wikipedia describes as an outspoken critic of transgenderism, but I would describe as a rancid little worm. And yeah, if you hadn't guessed, George Galloway's opinions about trans people, they're not great.
This transmania has gone far enough.
Good pussycat, yes. Good pussycat.
I honestly felt physically ill.
Look, in case I'm waffling here or mincing my words, here's a picture of George Galloway with Nigel Farage. And here he is shaking hands with Steve Bannon. Galloway is a good example of someone who buys in, but doesn't necessarily believe. He didn't build his platform on sharing much explicitly conspiracist content, but you only have to look at his audience to see that the people George is speaking to are picking up what he's laying down. His comments are constantly full of mentions of globalists, the Great Reset, a popular conspiracy theory among anti-vaxxers, and oh shit, I can't say the name of the horse paste on YouTube, but people also complain when I say horse paste, so let's say Mr. Chips' patented apple jelly. Galloway is a kind of socialist who thinks that appealing to bigots, reactionaries, and conspiracy cranks helps him appeal to the real working class, and he's getting exactly the audience he's been asking for. Speaking of Seabiscuit's secret source, someone who's been increasingly conspiratorial for a long time, who recently took an anti-vaccine turn, is Jimmy Dore.
Why is that study taking so long? They could get the vaccines to you in 90 days or whatever it was. I don't know how long it was. It wasn't a long time. But they can't figure out if another drug treats it for 2 fucking years?
Sean already made a great video unpacking Dore lying about Shadowfax frubes, so I'm not going to retread the exact same ground here. Jimmy Dore made a name for himself online through the Young Turks, but for as long as Dore has been doing politics in the public eye, he's always tended towards conspiracism. In much the same way as Galloway, Dore has repeatedly tried to deny the horrific crimes of dictators like Bashar al-Assad, who Galloway also vehemently defends, by saying that the mainstream media is lying about war crimes and human rights abuses. It comes from this place where folks on the left get a lot of validation and recognition for pointing out where the mainstream media and the government lie about stuff, that everything promoted by the mainstream media must be implicitly untrustworthy. Here's a clip of Dore appearing on the Last American Vagabond podcast on an episode titled The Shifting Political Landscape of the COVID-19 Deception.
You know, I think that's what all of this is showing us.
Yes, you're just repeating propaganda because you're a coward and you go along with herd mentality.
Yes.
And I can't blame regular people for thinking that
Clip Clop Calpol
is some kind of redneck drug that people are in horse paste because everybody tells them that. Well, it's just amazing that won't show up on her Wikipedia page.
Right.
But even when I get something right, it'll follow me around for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. Like when I was right about this Syrian gas attacks being false flags, and now they still say Jimmy Dore's a conspiracy theorist because he says that the Syrian gas attacks are false flags. Well, it's been proven true that was.
Exactly.
The OPCW whistleblowers have proven that were true. But they'll never take that off of Wikipedia, and that'll never follow MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, Rolling Stone, Joy-Ann Reid, none of the people who push that completely 100% false story. And by the way, the only thing you had to do to debunk that story was call the hospital. Nobody did it. It was reported by everybody. And by the way, Rachel Maddow never took down her tweet about it.
Exactly.
So and so when censorship is selective because they'll never censor the establishment. They're only going to, again, it's never, if you lie at the behest of the establishment, never a price to pay. If you tell the truth that upends a lie by the establishment, you will be censored.
I think what's really interesting in that clip is how you can see him shift from using language that acknowledges incentives and dynamics to language that calls all the people he disagrees with his enemies. Let's look at the transcript again.
You're just repeating propaganda because you're a coward and you go along with herd mentality. And I can't blame regular people for thinking that
Rafen
is some kind of redneck drug that people are and horse paste because everybody tells them that. And now they still say Jimmy Dore's a conspiracy theorist because he says that the Syrian gas attacks are false flags. But it's been proven. It's been proven true that they were false flags. The OPCW whistleblowers have proven that were true, but they'll never take that off Wikipedia, and they'll never follow MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, Rolling Stone, Joy-Ann Reid, none of the people who pushed that completely 100% false story. And so, censorship is selective because they'll never censor the establishment. They're never gonna, again, if you lie at the behest of the establishment, never a price to pay. If you tell the truth that upends a lie by the establishment, you will be censored.
His language becomes not only more hostile, but also more conspiratorial. He's attributing malice where incompetence and a systemic perspective would explain much, much more. The way that Jimmy Dore argues against vaccines is, typically for a conspiracy theorist, by sharing studies that show how alternative treatments could be good, maybe, but the mainstream media will never show you these studies. It's all selective reading. If it could be spun to agree with his narrative, it's a good and useful fact. If it disagrees outright, it's more mainstream media disinformation. From one angle, it's tempting to go easier on Jimmy Dore. He's an older guy, he was already more vulnerable, and from what he describes, it sounds like he got COVID after getting vaccinated, which does happen, but it's understandable why that would be a scary experience. I've had COVID. It sucks! However, what I obviously can't sympathize with or make any apologies for is spreading dangerous medical advice to vulnerable people who are looking for any excuse not to get vaccinated. The problem with Centaur shampoo isn't that it doesn't work in any case for any course of treatment. The issue is that people who look to popular figures for guidance and advice will take as much of the stuff as possible, way beyond the amount that would be prescribed under any conditions, and just poison themselves. I actually know someone who caught COVID, and because they still live with their parents who are MAGA conspiracy theorists, they were forcibly given this fucking dewormer while already sick with coronavirus. I guess what's really interesting here is how Jimmy Dore approaches journalism and the search for truth. He says he's not a journalist, and he comes from comedy. Though I've never actually seen him tell a joke, he just makes that face he makes after what he assumes will be a provocative statement. And I think it's important to understand Dore isn't a journalist, even though he's trying his best to wade deep into issues of credible sources, cover-ups, manufacturing consent, and mainstream media disinformation. His main argument in that clip for why you should believe him about pony porridge is that Rachel Maddow lies about things. In particular, a Syrian gas attack he says was a false flag, and he actually does this all the time. For instance, discussing the mainstream coverage of the gas attacks with Aaron Mate of Grey Zone Media, he said,
"How can you ever trust that news agency ever again? I can't." And what is the implications of that? What does that say?
Clearly for Jimmy Dore, once a news outlet has been caught lying, they can never be trustworthy again, which certainly has a lot of populist appeal as an idea. As someone who would like the media to tell the perfect truth 100% of the time, I find it very noble. But what Jimmy is calling a proven lie is actually a lot messier than he would like to make it seem, and we're going to have to get into that. However, we're running into the problem we were always going to have talking about conspiracy theories on the left. Namely, well, you tend to validate things based on the history that you already know, and I know some people by now are at home going, if you know about Operation Gladio, none of this is really surprising. And some people are at home going, well, clearly it was the Area 51 stealth plane program testing their transgendification gas, and then they faked the reports to make it look like chlorine. Okay, no, but seriously, there are people at home thinking, Sophie, false flag attacks are a real thing that happens. And you remember the weapons of mass destruction hype from the 2000s. Manufacturing consent is done all the time, and you can't take either side at face value during a war. And yes, a comprehensive understanding of history and American imperialism, and especially the intelligence community and geopolitics today, does require knowing some things that seem like crank nonsense to other people. Before we get any further, we're gonna have to confront the question. What about when conspiracy theories are true?
Because you're corrupted and co-op. I'm reporting on this thing. I'm not saying it. I'm just reporting it. I'm not giving anybody.
Literally have an alien base, and they are literally communicating, and they've got like astronaut level people taking super hardcore levels of drugs and going into meetings with these things and making intergalactic deals.
Following a robbery of FBI offices, documents showed that the government had been involved in an illegal surveillance operation, monitoring, infiltrating, and even manipulating radical political groups in a counterintelligence program known as COINTELPRO. This sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's true. I'm breaking no new ground here, this is all on Wikipedia. The same documents revealed the assassination of Black Panther Fred Hampton had been a coordinated effort by the FBI and Illinois police. The history of neoliberalism itself sounds like a conspiracy theory. Milton Friedman and the Chicago School, a bunch of hyper-capitalist libertarian fanatics who wound up advising government agencies all over the world, using the CIA to enact coups to implement free market capitalism. If you know about this history, actually a lot of the stuff Alex Jones and others say about the intelligence community suddenly become apparent references to real things that you know took place. That's one way that traveling in the milieu of stigmatized knowledge can lead you to conspiracism. How about something which I'd call a conspiracy theory, which is not verified by any official sources, which I also believe to be true?
And the FBI killed Martin Luther King.
Is a conspiracy theory, in that it is not verified by official sources, it serves a purpose in the conversation, and in that context, it reflects an intergroup social conflict. The American government is racist as hell. However, King's family have been saying that James Earl Ray was framed and that the FBI killed King since literally the day he died, and there is plenty of evidence to back that up. though most of it circumstantial. Again, I believe this, but I'm not telling you to believe this. I'm not telling you this is true, because I think I have a responsibility to communicate when things have not been proven. When you start to read through the literature around conspiracy theories, it becomes clear there is a division among scholars. The division largely comes down to this question: what about when conspiracy theories are true? It isn't about how to react to true conspiracy theories, or anything so prescriptive. After all, these are academics. But rather, how to define the truth. It's kind of a big question. It's been perplexing philosophers, morally ambiguous politicians, and people coming down from heroic trips for literally thousands of years. What, even is reality? Man? In classic rhetorical style, I will outline the side I disagree with first, tell you why they suck, and then tell you the side I prefer. But I encourage everyone to go and read about it, because it's a complex subject and really interesting. The first approach you often encounter is to look at conspiracy theories as a deviation away from something called reality. What is reality, and how can we tell what happens in reality? Well, official sources tell us. What they say on the news is true. And if they make a mistake, which they do sometimes because they're only human, eventually they'll let us know and we can update our understanding of reality to accommodate. In the book Creating Conspiracy Beliefs, the authors cite Keith Harris's definition of a conspiracy theory, saying that the following criteria make something a conspiracy theory.
1. It posits an explanation for a target event or set of target events that is alternative to the official account of the events. 2. Claims that the events was or were brought about by one or more conspirators. 3. Posits that the architects of the events are involved in promoting the official account. 4. Has greater explanatory power than the official account.
The authors go on to say,
we define conspiracy belief as the subjective conviction that a small group of powerful actors is secretly working together to produce an unlawful and/or harmful outcome for others in society.
Yes, imagine if a small group of powerful people were making society worse on purpose. To review. There are official accounts of events, and when people differ from those official accounts, claiming that an alternate set of events took place, and that the architects or beneficiaries of those events are covering it up, that is a conspiracy theory. When that belief is internalized as an outlook on life, that is conspiracy belief. Here's my issue. According to Keith Harris's criteria, we can point to all sorts of things as conspiracy theories that are categorically not, and not just because they're true or happened in reality. Various historical genocides meet all of the criteria, or met all of the criteria at the time they were happening. The genocide of Palestinians by Israeli forces meet the criteria today. Marx's critique of capitalism isn't just beloved by lefto-commie radicals like me, but serves as the basis for much of modern economics. And yet, thanks to registered passenger on Jeffrey Epstein's private plane and Margaret Thatcher's greatest achievement, Tony Blair, being a Marxist is a political death sentence in the UK today. It would be fair to say Marxism meets all the criteria. Operation Legacy, a program by the British government to destroy evidence of crimes committed by the British Empire, has been admitted to by the British government. However, the crimes being covered up will never be admitted to, because they destroyed all the evidence. So Operation Legacy doesn't meet the criteria for a conspiracy theory, but the crimes do. Do you see my point? They are treating authority as truth, and I think that is neither logical, safe, nor productive. For instance, the Iran-Contra affair is described like this.
What is known as the Iran-Contra affair was initially an unproven conspiracy theory. Over time, however, the evidence showed that the US government had secretly sold weapons to the commie government in Iran with the goal of funding the right-wing Contra Nicaraguan guerrillas in violation of the Boland Amendment. Thus, unproven conspiracy theories are sometimes subsequently convincingly supported.
And to me, that just seems buck wild. The approach that I prefer, as discussed at length in Michael Barkun's Culture of Conspiracy, is to make a distinction between what we call authorized knowledge and stigmatized knowledge. What is true or untrue, that's down to the facts. But the mainstream authorities, the government, the media, academia, etc., authorize certain knowledge to be accepted as true and stigmatize other knowledge to be disregarded. I think this paints a much more accurate picture of the state of knowledge in our society. As Michael Barkun describes it,
stigmatized knowledge, the broader category in which conspiracy theories nest, is that set of knowledge claims rejected or ignored by certifying institutions. In other words, by authorities of some sort. To advance stigmatized knowledge claims is to challenge authority.
Which I think is pretty interesting given the world that we live in now. This, of course, didn't escape Barkun's attention either. He goes on to say,
the movement of stigmatized knowledge into the mainstream therefore tells us something about the relative strength of authority. For the stronger authoritative institutions are, the greater their capacity to separate stigmatized knowledge to the fringe. The prevalence of conspiracy theories and other forms of stigmatized knowledge, such as ideas about the year 2012, constitute a barometer that suggests a weakening of authority. The resilience of such recent features as the birther theories that strike at the heart of the presidency and the 9/11 theories that implicate the national government in an attack on American soil are further indicators of this weakening.
So, what really is a conspiracy theory? I've left it deliberately vague until now, and the only definition I offered I then argued against, and the reason for that is that I'm kind of ambivalent on the exact question we're discussing. If a conspiracy theory is true, is it no longer a conspiracy theory? I don't think so. I think conspiracy theories are sometimes true, but I think the more important distinction to make is that a conspiracy theory is a form of stigmatized knowledge. People often think that conspiracy theories can be debunked by picking away at particular facts or claims, like pulling out the bottom of a house of cards, bringing the whole thing down, but to a conspiracy theorist, it's a lot more like an impressionist painting, and debunking does little more than smudging a brushstroke, leaving the overall impression unchanged. Conspiracy theories have this bizarre relationship to the truth because conspiracy theories reflect intergroup social conflicts. And so, even if you could say that conspiracy theory, broadly speaking, is true, it might mean radically different things to different people. Take, for example, the popular modern conspiracy theory and internet meme, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. To some, this statement implies the involvement of Hillary Clinton and other liberal politicians. To others, Donald Trump and conservatives. But crucially, the truth has very little bearing on the narrative. The veracity of the statement that Epstein was murdered by a conspiracy doesn't change the statement really being made, that members of the ruling class had provable ties to Epstein, which might implicate them in his death, or might not. But very few people choose to implicate the ruling class broadly when discussing this narrative, choosing instead to implicate their perceived enemies and vindicate their perceived allies. In actuality, the social conflict here is between the public, who deserve public servants who are accountable and won't have ties to child sex traffickers, or at the very least, a justice system that will take power away from those people if they do, and the ruling class, who want to remain unaccountable. So let's talk about Jimmy Dore and Syrian gas attacks. In 2018, in the city of Douma in southern Syria, a gas attack killed between 40 and 50 people and wounded hundreds of others. A week later, after outraged news coverage and expedited political consensus from Western politicians that the attacks must have been committed by Assad's government against their own people, the US, UK, and France carried out a series of military strikes against government sites in Syria. In the months and years that followed, a fact-finding mission and report by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons found that the gas used was, and I'm not saying this as a scientist or weapons expert, basically chlorine gas. Syria and Russia responded to the events by claiming the US and UK had staged the attack and faked videos and reports in order to justify a military strike, dismissing the OPCW report published by Bellingcat, which the Russian government has claimed is funded by the American government to smear Russia. Bellingcat has documented extensive use of chemical weapons in the Syrian civil war, a UN investigation into which Russia vetoed earlier in 2018. The gas attack conspiracy theory, here referred to in the singular, but like all conspiracy theories, extremely plural in its diversity of narratives, facts, and characters, it quickly exploded among self-proclaimed anti-imperialists such as Jimmy Dore, George Galloway, and the staff at the Grey Zone. So when Jimmy Dore says in that clip that OPCW whistleblowers have proven that the attacks were a false flag, what he means is that WikiLeaks shared reports from within the OPCW casting doubt on whether the gas canisters had been dropped by helicopter, implicating Assad's government, or placed manually, implicating the Syrian rebels, White Helmets, or whichever intelligence agencies you'd prefer to believe were involved. I say it like that because between them, Dore and the Grey Zone have tried to cast doubt on whether the attacks took place at all, whether chlorine gas was used, who was responsible, and why. All these pieces are fungible because the truth of what happened doesn't matter. What matters is that Rachel Maddow is a liar who can't be trusted. The problem is that just like with COVID, Jimmy Dore's coverage isn't motivated simply by uncovering the truth, but a conspiratorial motivated logic instead. When Dore talks about the gas attacks, the consistent elements of his conjecture are that the US government was using the attacks as a justification to bomb Syria, and that the mainstream media, usually Rachel Maddow specifically, are untrustworthy liars, unlike Jimmy Dore, who you can trust. When CNN called Jimmy Dore a conspiracy theorist, Dore retorted that
CNN is not there to inform you, they're there to make money.
Again, the people Dore is discussing here have a documented history of helping to manufacture consent for American imperialism, and in the case of these gas attacks, that's literally what they're doing as well. But what they're saying doesn't have to be false for them to be using it toward imperialist ends. To extend the comparison to COVID, lots of COVID conspiracy theories point to, for example, heightened police powers as proof that the pandemic was manufactured to allow governments to implement authoritarian policies. The observation is true, the policies are real, it doesn't require the crisis to be manufactured for it to be true. Governments the world over, but especially under the neoliberal project, love to exploit crises occurring organically or instigated by them to tighten control on the population. But this is where conspiracy theorists use motivated reasoning. It's demonstrably true that the government is using the situation in the way they are pointing out is bad, but that isn't as good a story as if the whole crisis was manufactured. The story isn't proportional to your fear and outrage and betrayal at the government cynically exploiting a crisis. It isn't proportional to your feelings of stress and helplessness. So what's the answer? Well, believe what you will, but act safely and proportionately. If the government is surveilling radical groups, organize with the people you're most sure you can trust using appropriate OPSEC practices. If the government is implementing authoritarian policies using the pandemic as an excuse, you don't have to become an anti-vaxxer to oppose their policies. If the media is manufacturing consent for war, it will only damage your credibility to try and build the case that everything they say is false beyond all available evidence, when you could just question whether more bombs will help Syria anyway. You know what they say? Where there's smoke, sometimes someone is just burning their food, or smoking, or really bad at ironing. We need to talk about the economics of conspiracism a little bit. The first thing to understand is that grifters and scams are an absolutely essential part of a successful conspiracy theory. You have to have full-time, professional, paid evangelists if you're going to grow your scam into an MLM, or your MLM into a cult, or your cult into a religion, or at least neo-reactionary fascist sect of modern Christianity. At the risk of repeating myself, it's not to say that people who make money peddling conspiracy theories are only in it for the money. For example, for Jimmy Dore, it seems to be much more about the power trip of being taken as the only legitimate source of anti-imperialist news coverage, looking at the alternative sources that the mainstream media will never tell you about. Marjorie Taylor Greene is literally selling equestrian edibles to her audience. Alex Jones tells his fans that his pills, which are literally full of lead, will keep them safe from globalist mind control. It actually maps directly onto the relationship that their audience have to their content. Mainstream media, authorized knowledge, is poisonous, and it will kill you, or make you a slave, or put you back to sleep. So buy my patented Jimmy pills. 100% guaranteed truth. Side effects may include selective reading, aversion to science, and pulling the face. This is why outlets like The Grey Zone exist. The Grey Zone, founded in 2015 by Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton, set out their original mission as fighting for a multipolar world, or rather, a world not just ruled by America. However, they were identified as conspiracy theorists when they started denying chemical attacks in Syria, trying to expose any critics of Russia as Western state-funded stooges. In February 2020, Blumenthal wrote, Reuters, BBC, and Bellingcat participated in covert UK Foreign Office-funded programs to weaken Russia, leaked docs reveal. An article which is a small piece of internet history because it was the first to ever receive the Twitter warning, these materials may have been obtained through hacking. This is actually interesting from our perspective because that is a cut and dry example of the process of stigmatizing knowledge. Hacked and leaked documents by definition can't be verified unless the people they were stolen from admit they are legitimate. The documents Grey Zone published certainly implicate Reuters and the BBC as working with the UK government to promote British propaganda around the world, but their relationship to Bellingcat is tenuous at best. Bellingcat did workshops on journalistic standards and verifying information sources with the Zinc Network, a commercial research and marketing business who also bid to be involved with the UK government's propaganda project. This is how the grey zone operates a lot. This party has ties to this party who worked with these guys, therefore, etc. In the article, they claim Bellingcat is funded directly by the UK government. Once you start seeing what they're doing as conspiracy logic, it's obvious how it shapes everything that the grey zone does, and it leads to headlines like the one I just read, which, I don't know, is that libel? I don't know enough about the law here, but I think writing your headline that Bellingcat participated in covert UK Foreign Office-funded programs to weaken Russia, and then putting no evidence that that was the case in your actual article is, at the very least, low-quality journalism. For their constant denial of war crimes, not to mention their recent anti-vaccine turn, Grey Zone is a deprecated source on English Wikipedia. Deprecated sources aren't exactly banned, but Wikipedia won't let people use them as a source if there is any alternative available at all. Grey Zone is in great journalistic company as a deprecated source alongside The Sun, The Daily Mail, Jihad Watch, Breitbart, bestgore.com, and of course Russia Today. And I have to say, I find it pretty funny that Max Blumenthal is determined to prove that everyone else is funded by national governments and has connections to the political elite, because Max's dad, Sidney Blumenthal, was a presidential aide to Bill Clinton. When Hillary Clinton's emails were leaked in 2016, a bunch of them from her time as Secretary of State were Sidney Blumenthal emailing her Max's articles and her responding with things like,
"Please congratulate Max for another impressive piece. He's so good." Another smart piece, as usual. Max strikes again. Good stuff. Where is he now?
Am I saying all this to show a sinister connection between Max Blumenthal and the Clintons? No, I'm saying he's a spoiled trust fund kid, born into the American political elite and desperate to prove that everyone else is as well connected as he is. Max strikes again! When Grey Zone was launched, it was trading on Max's journalistic credibility, which he used to have because he did lots of good reporting about Israel and, yes, about Syria, but then he started getting more entrenched and binaristic in the way he talked about these complicated situations, disregarding any criticisms as mainstream misinformation. In 2016, he started spreading claims of false flag attacks by Syrian rebels, manufactured to justify a supposed American invasion which didn't happen. I think it's really important to keep remembering the people who lived through the weapons of mass destruction craze and witnessed the American media manufacturing consent for war in Iraq aren't pulling these claims out of nowhere. They're at least partially primed by real things that did happen in recent memory. The capitalist media is a hideous leviathan, and the ways that it manufactures consent for inhumanity and violence, both immediate and systemic, are horrible. Journalistic organizations driven by profit are at least in part controlled by media oligarchs like Rupert Murdoch, and stick to a line not dictated by speaking truth to power, but rather by the interests of powerful parties deeply invested in not changing the status quo. However, overemphasizing the control that these parties have over the media misses the larger problem. That an organically evolving system of incentives is open to abuse by the rich, and the only people who could intervene to keep the media truly free benefit from the way that it is biased. And that is a bigger and more serious problem than the media being controlled by a small, sinister cabal, because it cannot be solved by defeating a guy in a room somewhere. Public personalities like Dora or Galloway and outfits like the Grey Zone, however, don't exist in a vacuum where they're able to pursue pure, noble, journalistic truth. Independence in the entertainment and journalism industry means either being beholden to wealthy sponsors or the whims of your audience. And the most surefire way to capture an audience in the kind of media market we have is to convince them that every other source of informational nourishment is poison. Proving that other outlets are untrustworthy is the name of the game, and that's why they spin their wheels so much, trying to show that everyone else is either state-funded or backed by some wealthy benefactor, which probably makes this a great time to say that this video is sponsored by Boxu. Boxu is a premium snack subscription service which sends you monthly packages of snacks from Japan, and this season's box is my favorite color, pink, to celebrate the cherry blossoms. As well as snacks, Boxu always includes a tea pairing, and with all the sweetness in this month's box, they've included this delicious, savory, spring gold green tea. I'm going to enjoy these little cookies with my tea. Delicious. But honestly, I'm most excited about this fruit jelly from Kanagawa, which has cherry blossoms inside it.
I want to see you eat it.
I won't be eating it on screen.
How does that
I cannot put footage of me eating jelly on the internet.
out of a little bag.
It can't be.
Eating
It
jelly
cannot
out
be
of a
done.
bag. It's so pretty.
So use my code MARS10 or the link in the description to get 10% off your subscription to authentic Japanese snacks from Boxu. Don't miss out on this amazing snack journey through Japan.
If you want to see war against tyranny, if you want to see commitment, if you want to see 10 new reporters hired, and you want to see us even more effective, hell, you see what we've done with all the other great reporters and the Millie Weavers and the Caitlin Bennett's and the Owen Schroyers and everything we're doing, then energize me. Because I want to throw my fist. You ever have those dreams where you want to throw your fist at somebody, but you can't hit them hard, and it just doesn't do anything? Here's my fist, ready to ram down the throat of the globalist and tear their heart out. Only you can take this fist from not being able to move to focusing and getting ready and then energizing. And I'll reach right down their throat and grab their heart, and I'll tear it out even as they shove a sword into me. I want victory over them. We will crush their spirit with Jesus Christ's power. We are unstoppable, but you must loose it now.
I guess the core appeal of Alex Jones, or someone with that exact it factor that Jones has, is the kind of energy he brings. Everything he says is a kind of self-selecting filter, right? Where every new sentence you're tested, asked, are you really this gullible? Do you really believe what this round, red, wet man is telling you right now? And if you decide that you are, and you do, it just becomes this sublime noise. He's always screaming all the time, begging you to just wake up. Wake up to the complete paradigm of absolute control. Wake up and understand the satanic scum selling baby body parts to the Democrat organ harvesting labs. You know, it's wake up all the time. It's surreal. It's like being in a dream sequence in a horror movie. His delivery fills you with this energy. If you imagine that the people he's talking about are all the people you dislike, it actually becomes kind of cathartic. It feels good in a very juvenile way to hear that the bad people are irredeemably evil scum who have to be destroyed for the sake of humanity. It makes me think of, just bear with me for a second here, Batman. People like to talk about Batman being a fascist, and there are clear-cut examples of fascist dudes writing Batman stories as fascist propaganda to be enjoyed by fascists, but that's not really what people usually mean by the broader take, Batman is a fascist, is it? When people say that, they tend to be talking about how Batman's response to crime in Gotham is to put on a bat costume and punch poor people in the face, when he's a literal trust fund billionaire who could instead write a check for unimaginable wealth for every person he's putting in the hospital or sending to jail. He could help people in a meaningful way, but instead he approaches social ills with the attitude of a military assault. Because he's a fascist, right? But that ignores a pretty important aspect of Batman's stories, namely that Batman's world contains such people as the Jokester, Doubleman, Dr. Cold, and the Puzzler, and all of them are dangerous, highly capable, and sometimes even superpowered serial killers who will only kill more people in nefarious, overcomplicated, and silly ways, so Batman has to stop them any time that they aren't already in prison, and sometimes even when they are. So I guess what people mean when they say Batman is a fascist is, if he existed in the real world and also acted the way he does in the comics but without supervillains to fight, then he would be a fascist. We don't live in Batman's world. But if you take everything Alex Jones says at face value, you might think that we do. Hillary Clinton is poisoning the water supply to turn the frogs gay. Obama kidnapped the mayor and he's gonna turn him Muslim unless he gets $1 million. Space aliens are infiltrating the government and controlling... Sorry, shit, I just realized that's a thing Alex Jones actually said, which is literally a comic book plot. That's the Skrulls. Shit. I think that when we talk about conspiracy theory grifters and what they're trying to do, it's really helpful to think about what kind of world they're projecting. What does someone who believes what this person says think the world is like? How does that person act? It's worth thinking about. Let's talk about Russia Today for a second. I make fun of RT for the worst content that they put out, and I won't stop doing that, nor do I think it's a bad thing to do, but I want to be totally clear that I think the shutting down of RT America is wrong. We'll talk about the war. Trust me, the whole conspiracy left fucking exploded when Russia invaded Ukraine, but I don't want anyone to misunderstand me here. I think this kind of censorship is wrong. It's really important to get your news from a variety of sources, especially from different places around the world. Al Jazeera, for instance, which was also censored in America during the Iraq War, does great reporting on stuff around the world in ways that you wouldn't get from American, British, or European news sources. However, Al Jazeera is also owned by the Qatari royal family, so their reporting on Qatari interests might not be as good. Every news outlet has its bias, and you can still get something from it if you know what that bias is. The reason RT is worth our concern isn't that RT is Russian, it's because of RT journalist Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is one of the most prominent conspiracy leftists active in the Anglosphere today, and out of the people we're discussing, he's probably the most advanced in terms of his level of conspiracist nonsense. Maupin is also very well connected in the world of shitheads who call themselves communists, making a whole YouTube series with pseudo-communist transphobe Jyoti Brar, and appearing at a conference in 2018 with Alexander Dugin, one of the founders of Russia's National Bolshevik Party.
But I find this moment to be somewhat pivotal for me. To be sitting here next to Alexander Dugin. You know, the first time I heard the name Dugin, it was thrown at me as an epithet. And it was in 2014. A number of people began to denounce me in left-wing circles. I was called a Nazbol. I was called a Strasserist. And one of the favorite epithets that people began throwing at me was I was called a Duganist. All throughout the United States, they are tearing down Confederate monuments, right? And the Confederacy was an awful thing. I mean, not just for African Americans, but for white people. I do not defend the Confederacy, but they're not replacing those statues with anything. Because the notion on the political left is not just that it's wrong to have Confederate statues. The notion is that it's wrong to have statues of anything. One shouldn't be worshiping anything. The idea that you have heroes that you aspire to become, this is wrong. That's the message that's coming out of the modern left that is very carefully funded and controlled. You can go back to the 1950s with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, but there's a much more recent examples of their activities. I mean, at this point, the Institute for Policy Studies, the Rockefeller Foundations, the Ford Foundation, most people in the United States who espouse what appears to be a leftist ideology are being subsidized by the U.S. government, whether directly or indirectly.
It's very clear that Maupin, just like Jyoti Brar and George Galloway, is working hard to make communism cool and exciting to reactionaries and bigots. But something that's very funny about this, which comes across in his writing, and I really am sad about how much of his writing I had to read for this project, is that he doesn't think much of his audience's intelligence. Everything he writes is incredibly patronizing, like
Hannah Arendt, a favorite of the partisan review milieu, composed a book entitled Eichmann in Jerusalem, which was widely praised. In the book, she put forward the widely celebrated concept of the banality of evil, arguing that genocidal Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann was just an ordinary person, essentially making the case that all populism and mass mobilizations are fascistic in essence, because deep down, ordinary working-class people are Nazis.
Which is just a nightmare statement, because not only is it misrepresenting what Hannah Arendt said, not only is it glossing over tons of history in simplistic terms, but also at the same time as he misrepresents Arendt, Maupin is showing that he understands what she means, right? The banality of evil is so horrifying to Arendt exactly because ordinary people did carry out not only the Holocaust, but every little bit of the Nazi regime, and every inhuman and vile thing that human beings have ever done to one another. The complete revelation of the face of evil, the ability to gaze into the eyes of the architect of genocide and see a real human person with internal thoughts and dreams, is exactly what's so scary about the Holocaust, because ordinary people did turn in their neighbors, their colleagues, their fellow human beings to the Nazi extermination machine. And Caleb is incensed by this observation, because he believes in the sanctity and purity and supremacy of something that he calls ordinary working-class people. This is exactly why Caleb Maupin is so slippery. He says things like, "I'll never disavow other anti-imperialists," and "I'll never disavow other anti-imperialists" is exactly how a fascist, using the aesthetics of leftism, signals to other people who aren't welcome among the left because they're bigoted or insensitive or support genocidal regimes that they have a safe place with him. I would say that, though coded, what Maupin says there about Arendt amounts to soft Holocaust denial, which shouldn't be too surprising given the company that he keeps, and the fact that Maupin is an anti-Semite, trying hard but not doing well at hiding it. In 2015, Maupin wrote an anti-Semitic screed called Satan at the Fountainhead, the Israel Lobby and the Financial Crisis, which is a title that sounds bad for a book which is somehow worse. Though Maupin has tried to hide the contents of the book from readers by making it out of stock, he says he can't delist it for some reason. Someone has uploaded all of the book sans a couple dozen pages online. And if those couple dozen pages are Maupin saying, the rest of this book is a satire of what an extremely anti-Semitic person would say, then I sincerely apologize. The book is written in Maupin's usually dry and condescending style, as he lays out the connections between America and Israel, both historically and in the modern day. But rather than seeing Israel as a settler colonialist project, receiving support from the American ruling class, most of them not Jewish, but either fundamentalist Christians who view Israel as a part of an accelerationist mission to initiate the rapture, or supremacists invested in Israel as an outpost of American and European power in the Middle East, he paints a picture of an America that would be good if it weren't subverted by the nefarious forces of the Israel Lobby. As the title implies, he is describing the tail wagging the dog. He links back the 2008 financial crash, private prisons, the lowering of class consciousness, and just about every problem in society to Zionists and international bankers.
Christianity, Islam, and almost every other religion has condemned the practice of usury. The reason is simple. Lending money for interest is predatory.
Why? What could he? What could he mean? Almost every other. Ayn Rand, who Maupin refers to by her birth name Alyssa Rosenbaum, comes up a lot in the book because she's Maupin's prime example of an evil person. I'm not here to defend Ayn Rand. I really resent being made to defend Ayn Rand. She was a shitty person. But I don't think I have the same reason for disliking her as Maupin, who asks at one point in the book whether Rand has any right to say what is a core American value, since she is, after all, a Russian-born Jewish atheist. He also says that there is no Marxism in Israel, which is absurd. It's a whole fucking country. The book ends with the inspiring lines,
"People in the United States who are awakening in these increasingly turbulent times must begin to envision a new country for themselves and their children. When they do this, they are not alone. Almost all of humanity is now rising with the same aspirations and fighting the same common enemy."
And if the rest of the book is anything to go on, it's pretty clear who Caleb thinks our common enemy is. I'm front-loading talking about Maupin's anti-Semitism here because I think it's the first thing people should know about him, but also because it's part of what sets him apart. He has specific conspiracy theories he likes to spread. Don't worry, we're getting there. But his conspiracism is more advanced. It's conspiracy belief, not just conspiracy theories. He makes this distinction between imperialists and anti-imperialists like Galloway does, but he also likes to say that globalists is the word right-wingers use to mean imperialists. But then in later books he just says globalists himself, so I guess globalist means exactly what you think it means. It is conspiracist logic which facilitates this completely binaristic worldview. It doesn't matter if my heroes are part of the ruling class, it doesn't matter if they're capitalists, it doesn't matter if they're warmongering genocidal maniacs, because my enemies are worse. Either you are with me in my anti-imperialist crusade against the globalists and against vaccines, or you're part of the conspiracy as well. Grey Zone is a hub for people who think like this but have learned too many leftist ideas to just be a MAGA chud. People like Maupin are trying to be politicians for these people to support. Everyone I like are good Marxist-Leninists. Please disregard all the Marxist-Leninist groups who have disavowed me for being a reactionary loser. And all the people I hate are imperialists. And that's how you wind up with the Grey Zone publishing an article calling PhilosophyTube a paid operative for the royal family, and Maupin writing an entire book about how Breadtube are CIA. But wait a second here.
Quite a different agenda. Modern art. I was called Nazbol. I always felt very odd in left circles. I do not have any idea what imperialism is.
So what I'm telling you is China has no rules. 20 years ago, they had cows that produced human milk. 20 years ago, they had spiders that produced body armor, spider goats, okay? They have human-animal hybrids 30 years ago. They've got giant human tissue farms. You know, you hear, oh, your Achilles is torn. We've got grown in a lab a tendon. It's not a frickin' tendon grown in a lab. It's a frickin' deal humanoid. These aren't humans. The way they get around it is they make them.
Wait a minute.
They make them a few.
We're saying so many things.
I bet you
so
$10
many
million
different
humanoids
things.
are real.
I believe they are. But you say so many different things without stopping. It's hard
because
for
I'm
people
reporting
to
to the
absorb.
government agency so they'll listen and investigate. I'm decompartmentalizing.
Okay, but
this will be studied for years.
Breadtube is, or many people would say was, an online fandom bubble that developed in 2016 between the audiences of Lindsay Ellis, ContraPoints, HBomberGuy, and PhilosophyTube. A huge part of the origin of Breadtube can be found in responses to new atheism content on YouTube, and more specifically to the hangovers from the mass radicalization and harassment campaign Gamergate, with the original content creators making lots of content responding to, debunking, and countering the most egregious of the far-right personalities on YouTube, and then eventually moving on to talking about broader societal issues as the rise of the online far-right blended into the broader rise of the far-right around the world. In political terms, it's important to understand the formation of Breadtube in the context of progressive left-liberal politics reacting to the explosion of neo-reactionary movements online. If Breadtubers could be broadly said to have one stance in common, it's anti-fascism, although because the tenuous existence of Breadtube came out of a group of content creators, some of them friends, sharing an audience, and then that audience creating the r/Breadtube subreddit, there is no consistent set of beliefs to which Breadtubers subscribe. Not all Breadtubers are even socialists, let alone the same tendency, and pretty quickly the original creators started disavowing Breadtube, pointing out that they hadn't chosen to be Breadtube, and had no control over what it supposedly was. Now, of course, the training materials are available, but a lot of people have to learn on the job. We're all volunteers here, after all. There is nobody behind this. The algorithm drew together creators making similar content for a similar audience, and their fans celebrated the emergence of a new space for leftist content. It's really important to understand that most, if not all of this, has been driven by fans in order to understand what happened next. As new content creators popped up making leftist content and the politically engaged audience sought out new creators to label as Breadtube, fans started paying attention to Destiny, a popular political debate streamer that Breadtube fans were excited about because of various debates against far-right online personalities. In a direct response, Destiny made it clear, and continues to make it clear, that he finds out-and-out fascists like Lauren Southern far more agreeable than even very moderate leftists. However, the door had been opened and the Breadtube audience had firmly connected to the political debate space, and a low, low bar had been set. Any debater to the left of Destiny could seize the niche of Breadtube streamer, which is exactly what happened with streamers like Vorsh.
Because Jews don't actually control banks in the world.
There was a disproportionate number of Jewish control of banks in Germany during the Weimar Republic.
The surge in popularity of this kind of content creator made people like me deeply uncomfortable. And by people like me, I mean women, queer people, and other minorities, horrified as these ignorant and arrogant bros, making their bread and butter on harassment, rudeness, and an obnoxious refusal to ever learn anything unless it came at the direct expense of a marginalized creator, dominated the space. Politically, these debate streamers are liberals, and not just liberals, but very uninformed, politically ignorant liberals who don't understand why calling themselves socialists or anarchists doesn't make their political positions authentically leftist, and certainly doesn't make them well thought out. This is again driven by the consumer demographic of Breadtube, and by the basic dynamics of social media, which platform people who are controversial, well-liked by white straight cis men, and not necessarily people who are well-informed, or have even internally consistent politics. There also isn't a division between creator and audience. Debate streamers speak on average to a very young audience who understand that being a socialist is a good thing, but don't necessarily understand yet what it means. And the debate streamers themselves are the same, creating a feedback loop where all that matters is that the content creator never admit they're wrong about anything, no matter how well or poorly informed they are on any topic. We're dealing with an issue of authorities in a realm of stigmatized knowledge. This has led to a point where there are debate streamers and the people in their online social sphere on one side, and on the other side of the Breadtube schism, there are people who read books, do research, and process the information into thoughtful, considered content. However, both sides have equal claim to the title Breadtube, either being creators from the original cast or having emerged from the fandom, and also both sides have ambivalent relationships to the term, so neither claim it outright. So, in lieu of better names, let me suggest Cringe Angry Bros and Cool Tube. So, now I've made it clear I'm not doing this video to make any friends, the conspiracy left. We have enough context now to examine some of the statements being made by Morpin and Greyzone. Abby is funded by the Queen, Breadtube is CIA, but we still need a bit more history before we can really get into it. The rise of Breadtube wasn't entirely copacetic, of course. As with any social group, there were people who became infamous with the core community for being a bit of a shithead. Real heads remember the guy who called himself an anarchist but publicly defended chattel slavery. One such figure in the early days of the Breadtube community was Peter Coffin, a former comedy YouTuber and Bernie bro who, like many people, had moved further left during and following the 2016 election. Peter was producing video essays mainly focusing on the attention economy and social capital, concepts popular among situationist Marxists like Guy Debord. Most people involved in early Breadtube, myself included, interacted extensively with Peter, or even called them a friend, because Peter was very excited about and centered themselves in trying to organize the project of Breadtube to raise class consciousness via the internet. However, through a series of public outrages and toxic fallouts with other creators, Peter essentially fell out the bottom of the community, first working with the most notable creators, then burning bridges and calling them all liberals, then making connections with newer, growing creators in the space, then burning bridges and calling them all liberals, and then eventually blocking the entire community, but continuing to talk about them from behind the block and calling us all liberals.
I'm sorry, but you need to read this. Call it BoJack to avoid tripping the censors.
Now Peter is a minor player in the conspiracy left, using their platform to promote BoJack, The Great Reset, and other popular conspiracy left narratives. Peter, much like George Galloway, clearly sees conspiracy theorists as a potential base for leftist politics, which is why they often repeat Great Reset talking points. The Great Reset is a narrative that the World Economic Forum and other New World Order globalist organizations are planning to reshape the economy post-pandemic to disenfranchise the majority for the benefit of the few elites. The phrase you'll hear people like Alex Jones and Peter Coffin repeat often, which they attribute to the globalists, is, "You'll never own anything and you'll like it." So this is weird because conspiracy theories reflect intergroup social conflicts, and what the Great Reset reflects is the effects of neoliberal capitalism, but you have to offer that systemic understanding as an alternative to talking about the globalists. Talking about the globalists is not a viable communist position. So now I want to make note of the phenomenon of cancelling because it's going to be relevant from here on. It may shock you to hear this, but as a woman with a following online, I have a bit of first-hand experience with random angry weirdos getting mad at me for no reason. Paranoia begets paranoia, and fundamentally, the shape that mass cancelling takes is an incredibly paranoid one. Stories based on suspicions, based on hearsay, are repeated about a person, and the easiest thing in the world when you see people saying these things about you is to feel like everyone is out to get you. Because for as far as you can see, there are people who are angry at you saying things that seemingly come from nowhere. Obviously, not all cancelling is created equal, and more often than not what people are really getting cancelled for are unspoken frustrations, cognitive biases such as bigotry, or just being kinda cringe. Actually, let's restate that more clearly. Most of what is called cancelling is either someone from a marginalised community, or someone that the internet has deemed cringe, becoming the main character of Twitter for a day, because according to at least some people, they did something morally bad. People who are condemned by part of a community often lose viewers or followers, but people who respond to all criticism by saying, "I'm the real materialist here, you fucking liberal woke posers just don't understand real Marxism. Read Society of the Spectacle, then you'll understand how you're reinforcing the hegemonic mode by doing this to me," quickly drive themselves out of the community altogether. And this dynamic was repeating itself over and over and over and over, because in a space with no formalized system for dealing with social fallout, people turn into cops and abuse ideas of social propriety in order to police each other, allowing the loudest and most arrogant people who just ignore anything people are mad about to get away untouched perpetually. And the people who react to upset by acknowledging the upset in any way get the worst reactions. On the fringes, you have people who have been pushed out by a constant stream of cancelling and recancelling, and people who have self-exiled from the community because they are outraged that their favourite creators won't apologise for every perceived sin the fans have decided they committed. So, crucially here, the rise of Breadtube created a current of anti-fans and a collection of excluded personalities looking for an audience. The line between these is incredibly blurry because of the modern state of social media where everyone is expected to act somewhat as a brand manager and everyone is told that their access to a website gives them a platform. Let's go back to Michael Barkun to understand the dynamic at play here.
The rise of conspiracy theories also appears to closely track larger trends in public attitudes towards government. Surveys by the Pew Research Center demonstrate declining favorable public feelings toward a wide range of political institutions: Congress, numerous federal agencies, and the two major political parties. In general, levels of support have declined, sometimes dramatically, at least since the 1990s. The surveys also picked up a doubling from 2000 to 2010 in the proportion of respondents who considered themselves to be angry at the federal government. This group grew from 10% to 20% in the course of a decade. There were also predominantly negative views of financial institutions, large corporations, the national news media, and the entertainment industry. This is not to say that all those who distrust or are angry with government also believe in conspiracy theories described here. The decline in levels of public support for political institutions is a complex phenomenon with multiple causes that are separate from conspiracism. However, this phenomenon unquestionably provides a background that lends a surface support and credibility to conspiracy theories and to political skeptics to seek those theories out.
This is an important distinction to make. Conspiracy belief cannot be assigned directly to certain topics or communities as cleanly as you might necessarily think, and often conspiracy communities exist within larger ones. For example, Bakun also writes,
"While believers in space brothers have sometimes been conspiracists, they have more often simply awaited the ET's arrival without positing an evil cabal in opposition."
So as we already covered, the cultic milieu sits within a broader realm of stigmatized knowledge, and when you have a community that broadly organizes around mistrust of the government or the current worldwide politico-economic system, it's somewhat natural for conspiracist communities to exist within it. What the rise of Breadtube did was create a space for people who shared fundamentally almost all the same beliefs, but for various reasons defined themselves in opposition to the larger community. And that's why when Caleb Maupin had a debate with Destiny, and then a debate with Vorsh, and then a back and forth with Mildred from the channel Thought Slime, Peter Coffin saw them as an ally and immediately invited him on their podcast. Peter Coffin at this point has become completely hitched to Caleb Maupin's star. They are very much in his orbit, and despite everything about Maupin, this isn't unique. Maupin has actual, honest-to-God students, Maupinists, followers of Maupinism.
I am to LA what Ra's al Ghul was to Gotham.
But that's a whole other video I can't get into now. Much to the chagrin of people who would rather pretend Breadtube was never real, and a larger group of people who are sick of hearing about it, myself included, in 2021, Caleb Maupin published Breadtube Serves Imperialism. The book is highly praised by Max Blumenthal and George Galloway. Holy shit. It looks like Blumenthal's quote for the back cover wasn't even proofread. He spelled attention at attention, and they just put it on the book. Okay, you know what they say about judging books by their covers. Maybe we should get into this thing. The basic thesis of Breadtube Serves Imperialism is that the American ruling class is at war with itself, split between the isolationist white supremacist Trump faction and the imperialist warmongering liberals. This does reflect some amount of real observable truth, because America is clearly very divided, although both factions are equally warmongering and imperialist. This thesis is very much in line with the talk about internal divisions that you can see on Fox News, or in its most extreme form, on Alex Jones's shows. In the fully sci-fi world of Alex Jones, the breakaway society conspiracy theory is that the Earth is like a huge egg, and the liberal globalists are going to destroy the Earth when they leave in their big spaceship. The reality that this reflects is that increasingly far-right and religious fundamentalist elements have been gearing up for a second American Civil War for decades now, and by framing the liberals as the aggressors driving the division in society, they can propagandize and mobilize their base into preparing for war. It's not that the division isn't real, it's just the particular framing where liberal hegemony, wokeness, imperialism, used interchangeably with globalism, are the driving forces. In the book, Caleb won't say in totally explicit terms that he finds Trump's faction to be the heroic, morally superior side, but it's pretty obvious that's what he thinks.
During the presidential election, I'm a leftist, I come out of a left background, but I saw Donald Trump speak, and there were many times that he spoke, and I applauded. I heard him talk about how, there's this elite that is not loyal to the United States, these international bankers.
So what does this have to do with Breadtube? Well, Caleb educates his readers on the history of counter-gangs, a divide-and-conquer tactic used by regimes trying to suppress uprisings in which a synthetic opposition is formed to suppress the organic rebellion against the ruling class. That's Breadtube, what Caleb calls the synthetic left, which I cannot say enough. Thank you, Caleb. That sounds fucking rad as hell. What a cool name. Breadtube and their followers, according to Caleb, are a counter-gang, and he repeatedly tries to amp up the fear about Antifa super soldiers inspired by Breadtube liberals who are going to smash and burn small businesses, because all anyone on the synthetic left cares about is smashing. Though at times he makes it clear it's normal for counter-gangs not to know they're being supported by powerful allies, at other points he writes things like this.
In many streams, it seems apparent that Vosh has handlers or advisors who are often more familiar with Marxism than he is. Often, Vosh will be seen stuttering his way through explaining concepts that he does not clearly understand, clearly quoting someone else, most likely, an individual who learned the concept in an academic, not activist setting.
Yes, Caleb, Vosh is a deeply incurious person. He doesn't know anything about Marxism. I'm not going to disagree with you there, but Vosh's handlers and his advisors are called his Twitch chat and Google. He's trying to cobble together enough convincing-sounding bits and pieces that his chat, who broadly know even less than him, will think he's a legitimate socialist who is epically owning everyone else with his big muscular brain.
It has become clear to many viewers that the list of quotes has been prepared by someone else, and that Vosh knows very little about Russian or Chinese history. However, this has not stopped this smug video game player from occupying the position of being the primary Marxist voice on the internet.
The guy's a streamer. Look, I'm not defending his ignorance, to be clear. I find the guy contemptible, but I'm not going to take his ignorance as evidence there's a CIA agent just off screen handing him quotes either. This is a social media dynamic. A guy who could really benefit from sitting down away from public attention for like a year and reading some books is feeding a mishmash of nonsense to his audience who also don't read any books. It's frustrating, but it isn't a sinister conspiracy. The book more or less starts by profiling the people Caleb considers to be Breadtube, including Destiny, who nobody on Earth would call Breadtube, and several small streamers barely anyone has heard of, but not all of the biggest players in the actual formation of the clique. It's very strange, and it becomes clear pretty quickly to the reader that the people listed are largely just online politics content creators who Caleb has tangled with in some fashion, which is why that part of the book is Caleb's sincere attempt to dig up as much dirt as he can on them. I'm not going to get into the horrible shit he's trying to spread, but Morpin even publishes details of one content creator's family and their criminal convictions. This is so cheap and scummy, and so far from what anyone would call journalism, let alone the writings of a socialist. It was the great American socialist Eugene Debs who said, "While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free." And yet Morpin constantly tries to draw attention to criminality, lack of professionalism, and even drug use, because he's a reactionary talking to reactionaries, trying to scare them into thinking Antifa is coming to steal their lunch money. In one passage about Mildred from the channel Thought Slime, he says that her
videos tend to fixate on things like slime, feces, genitalia, and other things deemed to be ugly.
Because what could be less professional than talking about slime? Maybe writing a book intended to give as much detail as possible about your political enemies to neo-Nazis. Andrew Anglin loves this book. Andrew Anglin, for the blessedly uninformed, is an American neo-Nazi and one of the lead moderators of Stormfront, the neo-Nazi messaging board. Anglin wrote a great big post on Stormfront about how good the book is when it came out, and it's very helpful because it's basically just a decoded version of what Morpin's trying to say. Breadtube is the term these people use to refer to themselves. That includes Piker, Vorsh, and some other freaks and on YouTube and Twitch. It probably also includes TYT. Piker is the genetic nephew. Genetic nephew. Neo-Nazis write one single normal sentence ever challenge. Difficulty rating impossible. Anglin finishes the post, "Obviously normal working class people are not into gay sex or all this progressive stack identity politics stuff. This is all stuff from universities that you could never get a factory worker or a farmer to go along with. Basically, communists believed in empowering the working class, whereas Breadtube believes in forcing decadent, elitist values on the working class. Yeah, elitist values like gay sex." Bottom comrades, we must rise up and end the oppression of the subretariat by the domjoisie. Hey Andrew, Just so you know, every Spartan warrior had hot, wet in his ass and loved it. Anyway, it's all very telling that Andrew Anglin loves this book so much because neo-Nazis love the model of the world that talks about globalism, because it fits in perfectly with their great replacement shtick. Anglin loves the anti-imperialism. Can you hear me using air quotes here? Morpin's Anyway, look, this Nazi's talking about imperialism, all these conspiracy theorists are talking about imperialism. I'm realizing I should probably provide a working definition of imperialism before we carry on so we can distinguish between the actual phenomenon and what these clowns mean when they say the word. Imperialism is no longer the way it was for empires of yesteryear. I mean, it wasn't really that way for them either, but this image that people have of troops and armies occupying imperial territories is a very narrow view of empire. In reality, imperialism has a lot to do with economic domination, arguably more than it has to do with military domination in the modern context. States like ancient Rome had client states, which were dependent on Rome economically and had to follow the political mandates of the Senate, even though they weren't technically part of the empire, and today much of the world finds itself in similar relationships to more powerful and richer countries, especially America. This is because capitalism is a system by which the rich get richer on an individual and international scale. The legacy of colonialism means a lot of things, but one of the things that it means is that the world today is broadly divided between the descendants of the beneficiaries of colonialism, whose countries were able to take the wealth plundered from the rest of the world and turn it into even more wealth, and the people in the countries that were plundered. Enormous monopolies in the imperial core grow to such a scale that they're essentially able to own whole countries in the imperial periphery, countries whose resources and labor their production relies on. Oligarchs rich on investment in speculative markets, playing with debt and fictitious capital, while people directly impacted by their decisions starve or go homeless, are able to buy political influence to continuously protect both their profits and their picture of what a moral, fair world looks like. And it's a terrible picture of what a moral, fair world looks like, because we're talking about billionaires, usually with dynastic intergenerational wealth. America controls much of the world with its enormous buying power, because the freedom in the free market is the freedom of the most powerful, the richest party, to do whatever they want. American money buys goods manufactured in countries dependent on the dollar, because exported capital from America forces those countries into dependence by design. American foreign aid, even, massive shipments of wheat or cotton, don't help other countries, but rather completely flatten their domestic wheat and cotton markets, devaluing the crops of local farmers and forcing dependence on America. And if they refuse the aid, America quickly threatens violence. Violence, military intervention, military domination aren't irrelevant in modern conversations about imperialism. They just aren't most of the imperialism actively happening, because most of the time the threat of violence is enough. But the threat of violence has to be credible for imperialism to work. This is why America models themselves as the world police, because they need to constantly show the rest of the world how powerful their military is and constantly give themselves a justification to upscale their military spending. Inside the imperial core, the engine of capitalist growth works as it ever does, walking on two legs, apocalypse and future. Surpluses of labor need to be absorbed with low-paying jobs, so working to stop some kind of collapse or catastrophe works perfectly. Surpluses of capital need to be absorbed by big projects to throw money into, so why not imagine a bright, beautiful future sponsored by Dow Chemical? Usually, of course, these two work in concert, keeping the machine running. In the 60s, it was the space race, with the promise of a bright future among the stars on one hand, and on the other, the nuclear Armageddon implicit in any conversation about whether the US or USSR would put rockets into orbit first. Today's imperialism is green, with American elites like Bill Gates warning that the global north has to lead the way in coming decades, because on a purely economic level, if a different country than America led the charge in combating climate change, America would have been defeated in the global free market. Imperialist capitalism dictates what these global conversations are about, how we imagine the future and how we conceptualize threats to it, so that we can be grateful to the status quo for keeping us from destruction and cheer on imperial powers as they shape the future for us. So yeah, the rest of Breadtube is seriously lacking in this regard, but it's not because they're paid, it's because of imperial core privilege and how the ruling class obfuscates international struggle from the imaginative landscape. It's because you're looking at a bunch of content creators and gamers who are responding to fascists, American conservatives, and anti-feminists online. Yes, they could do a better job talking about geopolitics. No, and I can't believe I have to say this, none of them are CIA. So the reason I gave so much background on the schism in Breadtube is because anyone aware of Breadtube would be aware of the deep divide in the community, the messy political alignments of various members, and the deep disagreements, often on the specific issues of imperialist foreign policy that Maupin is talking about. And Caleb Maupin claims to have worked on this book for a year, which, if he wasn't a hack fraud as well as a conspiracy theorist and a Nazball, would probably have led him to talk more intelligently about this loose affiliation of YouTubers and streamers. Instead, Caleb uses the idea that YouTubers go viral sometimes as an example of shady secrets in the Breadtube elite.
Some of them have odd skeletons in their closets. Natalie Wynn's sudden rise to prominence, Vosh's shady history in relation to topics like child pornography and lack of charisma. All of these indicate that Breadtube has powerful allies who are using them to serve a purpose other than communist revolution.
Caleb's historic examples of similar programs form the bulk of his arguments. For example, he claims that while the USSR turned more socially conservative and progressive socialists in the West expressed their discomfort with that, the CIA exploited the division, saying,
"During this time, many pro-Marxist college professors and writers in Europe received covert support from the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. They were carefully being nudged to push a more anti-Soviet brand of Marxism focused on cultural issues rather than class struggle."
Per the book, Breadtube is
most likely serving one section of the American ruling elite and the intelligence agencies.
And then, on Christmas Eve the same year, the Grey Zone published Leaked Files Expose Serious PsyOps Veteran Astroturfing Breadtube Star to Counter COVID Restriction Critics. Buckle in, we're in for some extremely Grey Zone journalism. The article begins,
"Leaked documents have revealed a state-sponsored influence operation designed to undermine critics of the British government's coronavirus policies by astroturfing a prominent founder of the Breadtube clique of anti-fascist YouTube influencers."
It's about a video that Abby Thorne of PhilosophyTube recently released, which at the time, Grey Zone staff apparently had decided was part of a plan to mind control vaccine-hesitant people and bring them under the thumb of the New World Order. The video, which wasn't actually out at the time, was about how different types of vaccine-hesitant people defend their refusal to get a vaccine, and prominently featured explanations from vaccine-hesitant people in their own words, not to debate or debunk them, but to examine reality and talk about why people move away from it. This was all made possible by a study that Abby and others at a group called Challenging Pseudoscience had conducted with help from the Royal Institution. For Grey Zone, however, this vaccine apologia was altogether too much. Anti-vaccine sentiments are pretty common among the conspiracy left, and this is just my speculation, but Grey Zone's pivot to anti-vaccine content seems like the reason that co-founder Ben Norton left the publication. He's started his own thing, Multipolarista, which sticks to the aims of a multipolar world, and he hasn't shared any of the anti-vax stuff that Max Blumenthal seems so keen on pushing. And he left about the same time that they started opposing vaccines. Max strikes again! The article, which is showing supposedly hacked documents discussing the plans for the PhilosophyTube video, was written by Max Blumenthal and someone called Kit Clarenberg. Oh my god! Why did these guys keep dressing themselves like this? Why do you look like side characters from Better Call Saul? Also, Kit, your Twitter bio could use some work, because I haven't seen any journalism so far, buddy. So the article, which at time of recording is still up, paints a connection between PhilosophyTube and the royal family by way of basically not understanding in the slightest way that what the Royal Institution is, because they're desperate to prove that Breadtube are all controlled by sinister forces. The actual funding for the study, as Abby discusses in the video, came from George Soros's Open Society Foundation, so they really missed a great opportunity to tie Soros in as well, you know? Their links to a serious PsyOps veteran are about as tenuous and nonsensical as you'd expect. Someone Abby works with on Challenging Pseudoscience is on a commission which is headed by someone called Peter Daszak, who was involved with the blah, blah, blah. How does anyone read this, honestly? The whole program would be sinister if the royal family actually had anything to do with it, and the people they say are involved were actually involved, and if you agree that vaccines are bad. So, solid reporting there, guys. The article has since been edited, but the original really doubled down on courting reactionaries, listing one of the groups victimized by Breadtube as
female high school athletes who complain about being forced to compete against biological males.
But according to Kit, the only reason anyone would call the article transphobic is because it talks about a trans woman. Look, this is in line with Morpin's slipperiness. Like, he'll say that he's happy to work with anti-abortion advocates, or claim to not be anti-trans, but he'd be happy to work with transphobes. And unfortunately, I'm used to this shit from Morpin by now, but God, the used car salesmen seem to be multiplying. Clarenberg continues to be a weird Twitter reply guy. Even now the video is out, claiming it to be a limited hangout, an intelligence community term for revealing a part of the program as damage control. Debate me! Debate me! I have a 2006 Honda Civic your family would look great in. So why are we talking about this? I'm giving the Breadtube is CIA conspiracy theory so much attention because it's the first big breakthrough the conspiracy left have concocted, rubbing their little brain cells together to produce this new theory, totally their own, and it's drawn them all together. Jimmy Dore had Max Blumenthal on his show to discuss the article and Sean's video about him, claiming that Sean had clearly been boosted by the YouTube algorithm, which is to say, whoever controls the YouTube algorithm.
And then you have Sean, who made a video about you, attacking you, who I actually didn't know he was affiliated with Breadtube, but he's considered part of their constellation. And it was very strategically placed. It was algorithmically boosted on YouTube.
Oh, it was definitely algorithmically boosted on YouTube. No fucking doubt about that. That was given the favored treatment on YouTube. The CIA and the intelligence beholden that Google and YouTube, they're in bed with the fucking intelligence community. Of course they are, Google.
And in the episode, they also watch a video where Morpin is talking to one of his disciples, Jackson Hinkle, about the Breadtube conspiracy. Morpin is actually quoted in the Grey Zone article saying,
"It does not surprise me at all to find out there is documented evidence that the British royal family and an intelligence contractor is bankrolling the work of Abigail Thorne. It lines up with everything I have observed about her and the Breadtube trend overall."
And you know, when he talks about the book, Morpin insists that it's other people uncharitably mischaracterizing it when they say that he's saying Breadtube is CIA. But not only is that absolutely what the book does say, but his orbiters like Peter Coffin are pretty explicit about what is really being said here.
Something y'all need to think more about. A couple of days ago, PhilosophyTube was outed as working with USAID-aligned imperialist MPOs and the British government. IMO, that probably has something to do with Lindsay Ellis quitting. Just saying.
Jesus Christ. So Lindsay Ellis is CIA? Okay, who else is CIA, Peter? Is Doug Walker CIA? Is Jake Paul CIA? Morpin also went on Peter's stream to talk about the book, where, hilariously, he said,
if Lenin were alive today and he saw this happening, he would have written a book about Breadtube. You can bet if Mao was around today, he would have written a book about Breadtube.
Yes, Caleb, you're just like Lenin. You're just like Mao Zedong. Everyone is very proud of you, and you're definitely a real communist. Here too, Morpin says that anyone who's saying that he said that Breadtube is CIA is taking his words uncharitably, and at this point it's just absurd. This is the conspiracy left's own conspiracy theory, to prove how they're cool and normal, and everyone who opposes them is a fake liar. Everyone's getting in on it. Morpin may as well just own what he said and be proud of his invention. But hold up a sweet, tender, loving minute there, bucko. Is this an original conspiracy theory? Let's investigate. In the chapter, What and Who is Breadtube, Morpin lists all the content creators he thinks are involved. But then, he also talks about someone called Dr. Steve Hassan, who Morpin says has friends on the inside, and is
definitely not a part of the Breadtube universe, but certainly lurks in the background of discussions about, quote, deprogramming.
Okay, this is promising. We have some kind of sinister, shadowy figure pulling all the strings from behind the scenes. So who is this? I've never heard of this person before. Steve Hassan is a pop psychologist and cult researcher whose main contribution to cult research, the Byte model, has been debunked by more serious cult researchers. But he called Trump's following a cult, so that's probably why Caleb doesn't like him. Just like with Grey Zone's serious psyops veteran, Dr. Hassan has next to nothing to do with Breadtube. Actually, he thinks that trans people are a cult, and he tweeted about how hypnoporn is brainwashing to trick people into transing their gender, which would probably make it pretty hard for him to engage with the majority of Breadtube at all, so I don't really understand what reason Caleb has for bringing him up here. Oh, except maybe that Dr. Hassan was raised Jewish and every time Caleb Maupin points a finger there is a Jewish person on the other end. Okay, let's see what Caleb actually uses as evidence that this kind of manipulation could be taking place.
There's a historical precedent for this called the Congress for Cultural Freedom.
Mhm.
During the 1950s, the CIA had a program for covertly funding left-wing voices, artists, intellectuals, and others. They set up a magazine called Partisan Review in the United States. They set up a magazine called Encounter in Britain, and in Germany they had a magazine called Der Monat. That's where the Frankfurt School received a lot of its funding. And
Oh my god! It was cultural Marxism the whole time! You only have to Google CIA Frankfurt School to see it. This is this cultural Marxism conspiracy theory from the LaRouche movement, which Caleb is part of. Holy shit! Okay, shit. Lyndon LaRouche, American politician, anti-Semite, and conspiracy theorist, spread the idea that Marxists in the West were being manipulated into hating Stalinist cultural reforms that made the USSR more conservative because he was a reactionary and didn't like the Communist Party of the USA being progressive. So they all had to be CIA agents. He called Angela Davis a CIA agent. She went to jail, and he called her a fucking CIA agent. I want to say Maupin is living up to being the Lyndon LaRouche of our time, but I'm really worried he'll take that as a compliment. Would it shock you to learn that LaRoucheite cultural Marxism also claims that European leftists are paid by, yep, the royal family? Yes, this isn't just Caleb's thing. Even Greyzone are getting in on it. God, I can't believe it's still cultural Marxism after all this time. I think H-Bomb's video on that was one of the first Breadtube videos I ever watched. Truly, the woke Ouroboros is complete. Sad though, really. They don't make cultural Marxism conspiracists like they used to. We used to get lectured by a buff Swedish beefcake. Now we have Beaker from the Muppets wearing his dad's suit. Getting more serious again, this is a perfect demonstration of how you cannot use conspiracy theories as part of a leftist project. As Michael Barkun puts it,
there can certainly be conspiracy theories that are not anti-Semitic, but contemporary conspiracy theories manifest a dynamics of expansion. The movement from event conspiracies to systemic conspiracies to super conspiracies. As this progression occurs, two characteristics appear. First, the more a conspiracy theory seeks to explain, the larger its domain of evil. The conspiracy includes more and more malevolent agents. Second, the more exclusive the conspiracy theory, the less susceptible it is to disproof. For skeptics and their evidence are increasingly identified with the powers of evil. The result of those processes is that the villains who populate conspiracy theories tend to multiply rapidly. Conspiracists find it difficult to keep out new putative evildoers. UFOlogists begin with conspiracy theories that had nothing to do with anti-Semitism, yet in some cases end up testifying to the veracity of the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
it's a one-way train and it has no fucking brakes, so your best possible option is to jump off before it gathers steam. Hey, I landed that one. Good metaphor. Good for me. Conspiracy theories reflect intergroup social conflicts. And it's just pretty sad to be able to say the social conflict being reflected here is that Caleb Maupin and the Greyzone feel embarrassed they aren't as popular on YouTube as other leftists, and that Peter Coffin used to be friends with them before embarrassing themselves publicly, and that the audience they all share dislike the audience that Breadtube creators share and the content they make. Besides, all of this massively overstates the significance of leftist content creators. Streamers have found a new level of popularity, but the entirety of the leftist content sphere is just a teeny little blip in the grand scale of YouTube and Twitch, which for over a decade now have had shockingly far-right, reactionary, and bigoted politics as the absolute default. The internet is still a growing new thing, and the pattern of social development on it is fascinating. The most easy to produce, attention-grabbing content will always dominate a space without sufficient moderation or conscious thought by the people running it, and then, as audiences get tired of and desensitized to constant shock content, they turn to more well-produced, high-effort stuff. Often biased by who already made money off cheap shock content and therefore has the money to produce more, but eventually more people will fill that niche. Hopefully, people with a basic understanding of what they're talking about and the ability to establish some expertise and scientific rigor in the space, or, at the very least, the appearance of it. And that's Breadtube. It's just a dynamic of the space. That's also why tons of people have noticed and correctly pointed out that Breadtube is overwhelmingly white. It's a dynamic of YouTube audiences and how the algorithm pigeonholes marginalized creators. It's worth engaging with those kinds of criticisms because these systemic biases have real effects, just like it's worth pointing out how lacking in geopolitical understanding many content creators are, because acknowledging that kind of problem can allow us to tackle it. For Morpin, though, Breadtube is the CPUSA to his Lyndon LaRouche, a bunch of CIA-funded stooges trying to lock the real Marxists out of the conversation. One gets the sense, watching enough Morpin, that his audience are probably a bit older on average than Breadtube's. It's in the way he talks, like he wants to emulate being an expert on something. That's why he dresses like that, right? Like it's this aesthetic of intellectualism where he's dressing for the job he wants, but the people he idolizes are all grifting shitbergs he thinks are geniuses, so he's accidentally dressing like exactly what he is, a snake oil salesman. He takes himself incredibly seriously, but he doesn't want to put any effort into making his work more suited to the medium, which creates this kind of naive feeling. So he simultaneously looks young and old, which is why there's such a bring your child to work day energy to the guy. And that's part of the weird magic of the internet. Older people have been online not just for less of their lives proportionately, but often literally fewer hours of their lives than younger people. So younger people online can spot a nice solid type of guy from a mile off, but many older people can't. Look, I guess I'm speaking about the whole conspiracy left right now, but there's this naivety to the kind of world that each of them projects that says to me the audience they all share are themselves kind of naive. And that makes the way these guys act seem somewhere between gross and absolutely horrifyingly predatory, at least from where I'm standing. And then I was going to go on from here to a conclusion where I talked about broad lessons on the topic, but then something happened, which made the conspiracy left utterly explode into the most unbelievable takes, mental gymnastics, and new conspiracy theories. Russia invaded Ukraine.
I know conspiracy nuts and right-wing streamers, YouTubers, anti-science, alternative media people. I'm not saying I'm a Nazi. I don't see a lot of difference. Widely denounced wokeness, postmodern stuff. Everybody around you thinks that you're wrong.
On February 24th, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced an invasion of Ukraine, calling it a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify the country, though his speech strongly implied the erasure of Ukrainian sovereignty altogether. Shortly after his speech, Russian forces began a ground invasion of Ukraine along with airstrikes, and at time of writing, thousands of civilians have been killed with thousands more wounded. Over 2 million Ukrainian refugees have fled, although hundreds of thousands of people are still trapped in cities like Mariupol, which Russian forces have surrounded and shelled. The Western response has been broadly sympathetic to the Ukrainian people, with many people organizing fundraisers to support the victims of the invasion, though the far right seems split between whether fighting on the side of Ukraine would be defending the West from Eastern threat, or whether Putin is the last hope to save the white race from globalist liberalism. As the invasion began, the conspiracy left immediately began denying the invasion altogether. As the military project became undeniable, they shifted to claiming that it wasn't technically an invasion, but rather an operation to protect pro-Russian separatists from persecution by Ukrainian nationalists. Here in my editing chair recording audio at the last minute, I can say up until now their primary focus has been on the presence of neo-Nazis in Ukraine and the Ukrainian military. It's actually a good case study for everything we discussed earlier about how misinformation often comprises true facts being used in a malicious way or being promoted to frame a conversation the way one party wants. The Russian invasion is indefensible, and the mass slaughter of civilians is not something history will look kindly on, and the presence of the Azov battalion doesn't change that. Then, as Russian citizens began protesting the war, well, Peter Coffin's particular strategy of denial is to dip into classic anti-Semitic tropes, literally claiming George Soros is funding any resistance within and without Russia to Putin's invasion.
Likely funded by Open Society. Guess Open Society is feeling the burn.
And that's completely asinine. Bernie Sanders is an American congressman. He doesn't have to be paid by George Soros to be anti-Russia. And Peter Coffin went on Moats to talk with George Galloway about what Vosh thinks about Ukraine.
What about left of the Democrats? Where are the socialists and progressives in the United States lining up on this?
Well, I would say you end up seeing a lot of people who are identifying as maybe a socialist or a communist or what have you. And those folks are not necessarily really taking a different line than the Democrats. I mean, we see people like the various streamers, the people like Vosh, or there's any number of the surf. A lot of streamers, a lot of YouTubers, a lot of these sort of alternative media people.
The left of the Democrats, then, Bernie Sanders and the people around him.
Come on, Peter. You get invited to talk on someone's show, and they ask you what the left thinks, and you immediately start talking about Vosh? Aren't you embarrassed? I am. Peter has also been quick to seize on opportunities to claim false flag attacks within the war zones, claiming that a theater in Mariupol, a city indisputably shelled by Russian military forces, was supposedly blown up by Ukrainian neo-Nazis instead, to make Putin look worse, or something. Morpin, of course, has been non-stop on the war, as any other political content creator, with such thrilling releases as, "Why should American working people support Russia? Do not donate to Ukraine," and probably the most unhinged video I've seen from Caleb, and that's saying something, breaking down Putin's Ukraine speech.
Go and watch Putin's speech for yourself, right? It was a great speech. And for a while, they were showing it on CNN, and then they were like, oh shit, kill it, kill it. People in America might hear this and realize not only that he actually has a lot of very good points, but also that our leaders are fucking and Putin's a genius.
In the video, Caleb condescendingly tells his audience 5 times in a row that Stalin wasn't Russian.
Stalin wasn't Russian. Yeah, I know that's a shocker, right? How can Stalin not be Russian? He was the leader of the Soviet Union. Stalin wasn't Russian. Stalin was not Russian. Stalin wasn't Russian. Stalin was Georgian.
Insists Putin's obvious anti-communism is actually a huge win for communists.
And it wasn't a communist speech, per se, but the speech said a lot of things that a communist could agree with.
Claims that the USSR invented Ukraine.
Putin remarked, he said, it's so funny that these people that are Ukrainian nationalists are constantly talking about decommunization. Because there wouldn't be a Ukraine if it weren't for communism. Lenin, the guy who created modern Ukraine, they're tearing down all the statues to him. They're tearing down all the statues to Lenin. And they're tearing down all the statues to Stalin. And they're tearing down all the Soviet memorials. And again, there would not be a modern Ukraine if it weren't for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union designed it. And he said, so these people really want to decommunize. Maybe we will. And he was hinting at the fact that, if these people really, really want to completely decommunize, then they'll be absorbed back into Russia. And what Putin argued in his speech is that belief that all nations have the right to national liberation, he took it a bit too far.
Oh, and my favorite, for absolutely no reason, Morpin stops himself from saying that Lenin was Russian to speculate about Lenin's possible Jewish ancestry.
Because Lenin was a Russian. And Lenin was a Russian. He had some Jewish heritage, but he was ethnically Russian.
Lenin was Russian. Well, a bit Jewish, but he was still Russian. He claims that the Ukrainian people didn't even have written language before the USSR.
And giving them their own, and these people, they wouldn't even have their own, a lot of them wouldn't have their own written language if it wasn't for the Bolsheviks.
And that Stalin built all their infrastructure and power plants. Look, I know he's not being literal, but it has to be said. Stalin didn't build fucking anything, Caleb. Ukrainian workers built all that stuff, and this is typical of Morpin's great man approach to history, which is just so hysterically anti-communist. His point, as far as I can follow it, is that Ukrainian people are ungrateful for the USSR inventing them and giving them all their technology, including written language, therefore they should just be Russian instead. And it needs to be said, the conspiracy left's denial, first of the invasion and then of the violence against civilians, pivoting into justifications for why the invasion and the violence are good, actually, is exactly what the victims of misinformation within Russia are hearing as well. And I also need to say, I know some people will go from what I've been saying, the focus on Russia today, the blindly pro-Putin takes on Ukraine, and say that the people in the conspiracy left are funded by the Russian government. And I want to try and avoid that accusation because it's not something we have evidence for. These guys are cranks. They suck. They spread ridiculous misinformation. But beyond some of them working for RT directly, I don't think there's any kind of underhanded secret funding going on. I don't think these people are secretly paid by the Russian government, and I'll tell you why. Alex Jones is defending the invasion as well. There's a sizable audience who want to mistrust everything the American government does for some good reasons and some bad ones, and Alex Jones and the conspiracy left all cater toward them. And to that end, Jones has been sharing a conspiracy theory popular in Russia and China that there are bioweapon development labs in Ukraine, which are funded by the West, which Putin wants to seize. And by extension, possibly because those labs are where they manufactured the coronavirus. And the conspiracy left are sharing the same theory. Morpin is sharing it. Peter Coffin is retweeting Morpin sharing it. Has, one of the few Morpinist disciples, is sharing it. George Galloway produced a whole segment talking about it. On the American right, of course, it's much more popular to talk about the possibility of coronavirus being manufactured, but among the conspiracy left, their main focus of this story is the possibility of, and this is their term, not mine, weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine.
That documents and other evidence have been found very close to the Russian border of a full-scale biological weapons laboratory that was manufacturing and stockpiling weapons of mass destruction in the Ukraine.
Not to say that none of them are claiming coronavirus was made in a lab. Jimmy Dore, of course, is absolutely saying that on Moats with George Galloway.
And so who aren't you allowed to? And so now they get to decide what's true, what's not. And look at all the things just around the coronavirus that turned out to be false, that you weren't allowed to question. You weren't allowed to question if the virus came from a lab.
I'm so done. I've got no words left. This essay is already 40 pages long. To be clear about this, there are biological research labs where pathogens are stored, but much like KGB propaganda the US was using mosquitoes for biological warfare in the 80s, they're just pointing at fairly innocuous research facilities and claiming it's the center of a conspiracy. Alex Jones does this all the time with abortion facilities, claiming there are babies being kept alive for organ harvesting that good American patriots should go and liberate. This is the manufacturing of consent for an invasion, and it doesn't matter that they can point to a specific research facility, it's not a bio-warfare lab. Culture is not a monolith, but rather comprises the infinitesimal actions of individuals, many of them overtly positive, while contributing to an overall larger harmful pattern. American NGOs, helping people start businesses in the imperial periphery, are part of imperialism, and they are helping those people. US-funded labs in Ukraine stopping the spread of disease are part of imperialism and doing something uncomplicatedly good. But that doesn't make for as good a story. We might be bad, but they're worse. The eternal projection of conspiracy theorists is driven by a need to prove that their enemy is the greater evil, and that's why they're directly copying the strategy the American media used to justify the war in Iraq. Yes, we're fear-mongering about weapons of mass destruction to justify a vile and genocidal empire-building war, but our WMDs definitely exist for sure. When there's a war, these people tell you exactly who the fuck they are. They don't speak for the American working class. They don't speak for the Russian working class. They certainly don't speak for the Ukrainian working class. They don't speak for the working class anywhere. They just want to be the only ones their audience can listen to because everyone else is part of the globalist New World Order, and they don't care who it hurts or how much damage they do. Fire safety lesson, and this one is very important. Now, water can be very effective at stopping fires. I mean, it's basically the first thing we all think of when we see a fire. It works so well because it smothers the fire, depriving it of one of the two things it needs: oxygen. However, water isn't always good at fighting fires. If you see a pan or pot of burning oil, just about the worst thing you could do would be to pour water into it. When you pour water on a pan of burning oil, the water, which is denser than the oil, sinks to the bottom, where it superheats, turning into steam and propelling the burning oil out of the pan in what fire safety experts call an explosion. And that's how you burn down your house. The water doesn't feed the fire, but it does help the fire travel much, much faster than it would otherwise be able to. Sometimes water is the right thing to put out a fire. Sometimes it's something else. But if you want to put out fires every time, you need something more powerful than water. The truth. A lot of the time, a large amount of well-intentioned response to conspiracy theories is to try and combat them with facts. The thing is, facts and the truth aren't really the same thing. Lots of disparate facts can be used together to create a false understanding, and that's exactly what this does. Twitter has started pulling these little blurbs on its trending topics with the hopes of combating conspiracy theories, and that's really stupid, because giving people this information will not and can never simply on its own dispel conspiracy theories. If anything, this is strengthening it. I would go as far as to say this is dangerously inept. Facts and the truth are different things, and the truth requires actually imparting an understanding to people. Stories can be reflections of the truth, and facts help build stories. But the way an artist uses fiction to tell the truth, conspiracy theorists use facts to create fiction. So for example, the Great Reset conspiracy theory won't be countered by showing people what the World Economic Forum is up to, because the World Economic Forum is a neoliberal capitalist institution of American imperialism, and a lot of what it's doing is genuinely sinister. Reading about it might help people who believe Alex Jones's version of the Great Reset, where we're all in a Matrix-like simulation, but it won't help them to understand the way the world really works. Fundamentally, the shape of the story that people believe in remains the same if you aren't imparting a different understanding to people. Facts that agree with the conspiracy theory are fuel to the fire, and facts that disagree are all mainstream media lies. And the problem with the conspiracy left is they aren't imparting a different understanding to people. Their understanding of the world is conspiracist, attributing malice and collusion to every party that they oppose, which increasingly is just every party that isn't them. I started this project in part because I saw a lot of people who haven't got much exposure to real communists or Marxists and conflate these people with Marxism, or call them tankies or red browns, and I don't think that's enough. The reason that the analysis is incomplete without pointing out conspiracist logics is that the bigotry of fascism is not like the bigotry of your man in the pub. Fascist bigotry is inherently esoteric, utilizing greater explanatory power than official, politically correct accounts and using stigmatized knowledge to spread that bigotry to others. Fascist bigotry is inherently conspiratorial. The reason these people are dangerous, though none of them have succeeded at it yet, is that even the most well-intentioned of them, hoping to use conspiracy theorist audiences to spread Marxist ideas, is getting up every day and trying to dump water on the oil fire. The real reason I find the methodology of creating conspiracy beliefs so lacking is that they assume there is a spectrum, and on one end lies a person who believes everything they see on the news, and on the other lies someone who believes in conspiracy theories. And the truth is, more often than not, these are the same person. Skepticism is good. A critical, analytical approach to what you're being told is good, and more often than not, conspiracy theorists are people who are already treating authority as truth and have just switched out one authority for another. These people have switched out America for Putin. So we should avoid platforming these people, sure, but there's more we need to talk about here, because this is about how popular socialist ideas are becoming. Enough people are coming around to socialist economics, understanding that it can really help them and the people they care about. Even prominent far-right figures are voicing anti-capitalist ideas, and on the other side of the gap, these people are trying to build an alliance with the far right. They're organizing, they're getting together, they're meeting up in real life, and they're holding rallies. The CPI, or Center for Political Innovation, is Caleb Maupin's organization, which, as far as I can tell, is called the CPI, sometimes styled as the CPI USA, to just riff on the branding of the CPUSA, because Caleb conceptualizes himself as a modern LaRouche, splitting from the Communist Party of the USA and trying to steal their membership.
The so-called American left, in its entirety, cannot be redeemed whatsoever. It's not simply that we can build something from scratch, but we should cease to see leftists as a reservoir from which we should attempt to draw support.
Here is Keaton Mansfield, a central CPI figure, interrupting a DSA conference to yell at AOC. Here is Keaton Mansfield holding a Z symbol at the opening of the CPI conference. And here he is wishing he was Pope so that he could raise a holy army to fight for Russia in Ukraine, which he says is a new holy war and modern-day crusade.
And I also put the Orthodox cross because this is a holy crusade. I wish I was Pope for many reasons, I suppose, but primarily right now because I would, if I was Pope, or at least could speak to Pope Francis and nudge him in a direction, I would have him raise a crusading army for the Vatican of any Catholic male who is between the ages of 18 and 35, and we would go launch a crusade against Ukraine.
See, Maupin and his orbiters espouse an ideology that they call patriotic American socialism. There's a whole book someone could write about why this is a fucking nonsense idea. Maybe someone already has, actually. Okay, no, political theory nerds, here's a great niche for someone here. Go nuts. I will say someone holding up the flag of the USSR and the US together doesn't really scream communist to me. If anything, it just reminds me that Caleb went to that Nazbol conference with the founder of the Nazbol Party. The original Nazbols were people from the Tsarist army in the Russian Civil War who defected to the Red Army when they saw which side was winning and convinced themselves they could support communism as the next great era of Russian glory. Nazbols saw Stalin's theory of socialism in one country as a victory for their beliefs, and Nazbols are class enemies of people building a real communist society. Oh, and that's not me saying that, just to be clear. That's something someone in 1922 said. A little-known public speaker called Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, or Lenin. But a real Marxist like Caleb Maupin wouldn't want to hear what he had to say. He was a bit Jewish, after all. I want to get preachy for a bit. Progressive communists of different tendencies need to have solidarity with one another. We need to organize together and we need to work together, because in different places with different material conditions and different popularities of different tendencies, we all share the same class enemies, and we all are working towards the same thing. Conspiracy theories reflect intergroup social conflicts, and there really is a division, a culture war, within classes and stoked by ruling class manipulations, the woke and the anti-woke. However, tons of young people online are quickly realizing that this situation, these divisions, this oppression, cannot be resolved unless and until the existential threat to the oppressed is defeated. And if you say, I'll stand with people who oppose abortion, I support trans people, but I'll have solidarity with and organize with the people who are trying to exterminate them, you aren't impartial, you aren't movement building, you aren't having solidarity with your comrades, you are siding with oppression, and you are making your movement irrelevant. This isn't the same as helping people who have reactionary views. Unions and organizations don't kick people out for believing shitty things. Unions and organizations don't deny people help for believing shitty things. But someone who storms out of a union meeting because they ask people's pronouns isn't someone you can organize with. They're too sensitive. And someone who supports genocidal regimes in places like Texas against trans people isn't someone I could ever call a comrade, unless and until their understanding of the world fundamentally changes. These audiences cannot be reached out to through conspiracism, because what they are trying to emotionally defend with their conspiracism is bigotry, and for those purposes, the belief in coming change, the revolution, the civil war, breakaway civilization, the storm, day of the rope, is just millennialism. The coming storm is just another reason to disregard social progressivism in order to prepare more efficiently. Social progressivism is, after all, just another tool of neoliberal social control. It does suck to see someone who doesn't understand socialist theory or world history or even geopolitics today become someone that people turn to for leftist analysis, but calling them CIA really doesn't help anyone, and I would rather people were watching the most moderate, liberal breadtuber than the openly Nazi shit that dominated the space before. If people who care about marginalized people and understand socialism work together, we can create a rich and dynamic space for progressive leftism, and hopefully raise the standard of education that people expect from their political content creators, and then maybe we won't have content creators who call themselves socialists who are openly thirsty for America to invade countries in the global south. We need to have more intelligent discussion of leftist politics, and we need to have more discussion of the kind of world we would all like to live in. And maybe if we talk about the kind of world we'd like to live in, we can talk about how achievable it is. And maybe if we talk about how achievable it is, we can talk about how to get there. We have the capacity to produce everything we need for everyone on the planet right now. More food than the hungry are lacking, more empty homes than there are people without shelter. We could end war, hunger, and poverty if we could see that we are just one big family and start to act like it. But we can't treat that coming change, that shift, that revolution like a day of judgment for our allies to be vindicated and our enemies punished, because any story that simple is a comforting lie to get us to help kings make serfs of us into perpetuity. Workers of the world unite doesn't mean clinging to communist projects of the past. It means working together to build a future where no one is of more consequence than any other. Communism will never come from angry microphone boys in their bedroom teaching you arguments to make your racist uncle shit his pants, nor from guys in shirts and ties, cosplaying Soviet apparatchiks. Socialism that isn't led by indigenous people, queer people, people of color, disabled people will never lead the wave of the future, because the future will come from us feeding one another, sheltering one another, the ways that we will turn to one another for protection and care as the forever wars of the ruling class spin out of control. The future will come from us taking back society's fruits for society and no longer allowing anyone to declare society's creations theirs alone, from which they alone can profit. We have to organize, we have to have solidarity, we have to work together as progressive communists, because the people who want to change in regime, who see progressive values as holding them back, are organizing already. These people are actively harming our ability to advocate for a better world by associating communism with crank conspiracism, Kremlin apologia, and reactionary gibberish. The Russian war in Ukraine is an illegal war of aggression which has already killed thousands of civilians and will continue to harm the people there for generations. And these people are making a ridiculous false dichotomy for leftists by insisting that you have to choose a side between US imperialism and Russian empire building. But a real socialist would say, no war but class war, and real activists are working in Ukraine right now to help refugees, not giving speeches in a conference room in Texas about how smart Vladimir Putin is. We just passed the point of no return for climate chaos. Climate scientists around the world got together to announce that we are past a point where the consequences of climate change are irreversible. And the thing about climate change is it's not going to kill us all in one big catastrophic collapse. It's going to kill and is already killing the poorest people in the world first. People without the legal freedoms or resources to move are going to be the ones trapped in the harshest climates. Countries that don't have the money to build protective infrastructure are going to be the ones that see the biggest mass deaths, and imperialism is going to shape that because it's already the shape of global power. I am frustrated and angry, and I know that a lot of other people are too. I want to organize to change the way that our world works so that we can not just survive, but thrive as a society, thrive as a species, and even expand to new frontiers of exploration and discovery and human expression. And I know that we can do it, and I think other people are starting to realize that too, because the contradictions are sharpening, and people can't just look down and ignore them anymore. But to make the best world for everyone, the truth has to matter. The truth has to matter because the fucking planet is on fire, and a lot of people deny that, either explicitly or show in their actions that they don't really believe it. Whole countries, whole governments, our entire economic order is built on denying the obvious death we all face if the system is allowed to go on as it is. Nuclear war, climate change, even the pandemic would have killed fewer people on a communist fucking planet. People die every day because they don't have food or shelter, and that could literally not be the case. The truth has to matter because the planet is on fire, and only the truth can be used to fight fire.
sewer. Literal vampire potbelly goblins are hobbling around coming after us. Literal vampire potbelly goblins. Goblins. Grab them all. The chicks, they like it.
Hey everyone, I was gonna do a whole bit here doing Alex Jones and doing another animation where Alex Jones is telling you to go and subscribe to patreon.com/Sophie for Mars and all of that, the whole thing. It was gonna be fun, but honestly, this is the longest video I've ever made, and so complicated, so much research, so much everything, and so instead I really just want to thank all my friends who looked over the script. Molly, obviously, for making wonderful music like she always does. Everybody who read quotes, that was wonderful. Nat for drawing all the drawings for the animations, because they were really cool. My brother Martin for doing the neural net AI generation stuff that you saw in the middle, and my patrons for making everything possible. And I am gonna get you don't know this, but the last thing I do is record my credits outro every time, and that's what I'm doing right now. This is the last thing in the middle of the night. I've just finished, and wow, all is all I can say. So I'm gonna go now and rest, and please go to my Patreon so I can buy myself treats.